For the inquiry into budget estimates 21-22. Before I commence, it's the custom of this Parliament to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of this land, the Gadigal people of Aurora Nation, and I do that with due respect, as well as acknowledging other important contributors to the history of this site, those who constructed the Parliament House building, very often working in a dangerous industry, and the parliamentary staff over many decades who've supported MPs and made our work and representative role possible. We acknowledge and thank them all. I welcome senior officials from the Department of Education to this hearing about schools and early learning. Before we commence, if I could just make a few comments about the procedures. Today's proceedings will be broadcast live from the website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses at the estimates have a right to procedural fairness, according to the resolution of the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. Finally, could everyone please turn off their mobile phones or turn them to silent for the duration of the hearing? I note that all witnesses present have previously been sworn into this inquiry, and there's no need to do that again. Today's hearing will be conducted from 10 to 1:30 p.m. with a 15-minute break at 11:30 a.m. There will be questions from the opposition and the crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions. So thank you everyone for your attendance today, and we can begin with questions from the opposition. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks everyone. Lovely to see you all again. Can I just start by asking, I think it would be to Ms. Caccia, about the program to recruit teachers from overseas. Will they be, when teachers who are recruited from overseas, who have a curriculum that's not similar to the New South Wales curriculum, will there be any programs that are designed to get them up to speed, or is that just purely through the assessment process?
Thanks for the question. I think firstly starting by the fact that we're very pleased with the fact that we've had 3,000 expressions of interest, and they're from a number of countries, as we took a question on notice and provided the committee with that information recently. It's important to recognise that no matter where a teacher comes from, no matter where they've been trained, they will need to be accredited in accordance with the same guidelines as all teachers. And they are the national standards. We work very closely with NESA to make sure that they are very much part and parcel of having the qualifications that any teacher in our system has. The other part about the program, the international and interstate recruitment piece, involves the requirement to have 2 years of teaching experience. But when teachers start, obviously the experience is supplemented by many different things. They're mentored, and my colleagues Mirat Dizdar and Leanne Nixon can certainly talk to what actually happens operationally when a teacher begins in our system. But they're provided with that wraparound support to make sure that, to your point around curriculum, that they're getting the support they need. But I think it's really important to be clear that there's no requirement of an international teacher who's been trained overseas that is any different to any of the other teachers that we have by way of accreditation here in Australia, in New South Wales.
Okay, and so in terms of when they are trained overseas, is there a requirement for only 3 years, or is it a 4-year training requirement for that?
I think that would be, so what we do is we've obviously had 3,000 expressions of interest, and we're working our way through those at the moment. Clearly, we need to look at, as part of that assessment process, where people have trained and what the equivalent standards are, and that's all, as I said, part of that NESA accreditation process to make sure that teachers who teach here from overseas jurisdictions are very much accredited in the same way, at the same standard, to the same standards as other teachers.
Yeah, but Ms. Caccia, I asked a specific question. As part of that assessment, will it be a 3-year requirement or a 4-year requirement, or is there no formal requirement?
I think it will be, I think the answer is it will depend, that the requirements are the same as they are here. So the standards of teaching and academic instruction need to be meet the thresholds and the criteria of the assessment process here. I'm not sure whether you're referring to a specific jurisdiction. I'm more than happy to take that on notice if you like, and we can get back to you with further detail.
Ms. Huzos, if I could add, it's NESA that hold the standards for that accreditation, and anyone we recruit from overseas will need to meet the standards as set out by NESA for that process. And so we would expect them to meet the qualification requirements that NESA already have in place. You'd appreciate that in a global city and a global market overall, that we do have people who come here with teaching qualifications anyway and find themselves on visas able to work, and that they would also go through that NESA accreditation process. So there is a process here that isn't as well worn as we are seeking to make it, but does exist, and certainly NESA can provide you with further detail on the requirements for accreditation from overseas.
So, Ms.
teachers.
Harrison, if they're going through the existing process already, then what's new and different about the government's process now?
Because we are actively going to attract those teachers to bring them in, Ms. Huzos, which is not something we've done before.
And what's the process in terms of actively?
I'll ask Ms. Katcher to fill you in, but we have worked with engaging with teachers directly overseas to make sure that we can attract people here, and we're looking at the visa requirements and how we support those visa requirements into our system. But Ms. Katcher can provide you with some further information.
So, Ms. Huzos, if you could just elucidate on exactly what you're looking for, just so I can understand to the specifics of what you want.
Well, Ms. Harrison just said that there's an existing process in place, that they'll be accredited through the existing process. This has been trumpeted by the government. You've just talked about the 3,000 applications that have been received. Let's be clear, 139 are currently being assessed by NESA. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what's actually involved here.
And so, Ms. Huzos, just to put in context my previous comments, they were in relation to people who migrate to Australia of their own accord, and so are coming to Australia. They may be the spouse of someone who is already on a sponsored visa and also have a right to work. They might seek employment with us directly under those requirements or directly with a school, and it is that process I was saying existed. What is different in this instance is that it's a centralised recruitment activity aimed at attracting people into the profession from overseas.
Okay, so are you paying for their visas and relocation?
I will ask Ms. Katcher to provide the details on that.
I'll have to take the specifics of the exact package on notice, but I understand that obviously we're trying to facilitate the entry of teachers, particularly in STEM subjects, so very focused on that to make sure that those teachers are available to go to more difficult to staff regional and remote locations.
So, Ms. Katcher, do you have a budget to pay for visas or to pay for relocations?
Not to my knowledge, but I will take that specific issue on notice, Ms. Huzos.
Okay, and perhaps you can tell me, there's 139 that are being assessed at the moment by NESA. Does that mean that those 3,000 applications, are you working through those, or is it just the 100? So the 139 out of those 3,000, is that it, or are you going to have an ongoing assessment of those?
Sure. So just to be clear, it's 3,000 expressions of interest, not necessarily applications, and so we'll work through those. And obviously we're looking for the people who, in the first instance, who meet all the requirements at first pass, and then we'll be working through the others in due course.
Okay, so that means, so you are working through those other applications. Okay.
And just for context, Ms. Huzos, we announced this initiative, I think it was now back in the beginning of around September time, and so to already have had the expressions of interest go out and come back in at that volume, we're really pleased with the level of the expressions of interest that we've received, but obviously it will take time for us to work through those expressions of interest for suitability and to work through NESA and with NESA on the appropriate accreditation processes.
And of course, we're just interested in knowing what the requirements are and what's the programs that are in place around that. How long, if their visa and if their relocation costs are paid for, do you have a requirement for them to stay in a position for a certain period of time?
And so, Ms. Huzos, what I might do is take on notice the specifics of that question along with the visa issue that you've already raised, and also just in terms of the question you just asked, the requirements very explicitly, what those are, and provide those back to your notice as well. That
would be helpful. And if you can also provide us with, there have been 3,000 expressions of interest, do they then need to lodge an application in order to then be assessed by NESA?
So we will come back to you with those those details on
I
notice.
can answer that, Secretary.
Okay.
If that's so. Yes, they as part of their expression of interest, it's an application per se, and then what we will do if there's anything missing, we'll go back and ask them to provide the further details.
Okay, so when you say there's expressions of interest, there's 3,000 people who have lodged applications.
There's 3,000 people who've expressed interest, and obviously if we require further information, we go back to them. So we call them expressions of interest because they're not necessarily a formal application, and the reason being is that if they specify a particular region or location, we may require further information. So it's a nuance, I guess, around that. But a lot of people will apply as an expression of interest to begin with. They may not fill all the criteria, and then we'll go back. And as part of then the formal application process, we'll say, well, to complete your process, complete our administrative requirements, we need you to go back and furnish us with this further detail.
Okay, and so does that mean that there's only 139 in the first cut who actually fulfilled all the criteria?
Not necessarily. Obviously, we're keen. We want to run this as a parallel process. So we've got people who are expressing interest. We've got people we're going back to ask for further information. We've got people that we can identify readily that they're ready to be moved through the process. So there's many different streams happening at the same time concurrently.
Okay. I might just pass to my colleague for some questions.
Thanks. Look, I might draw the witness's attention to the answer supplied to supplementary questions number 59. The opposition asked, could you please provide a list of the number of injury incidents on New South Wales school grounds in 2020 and 2021 respectively, broken down by school, state electorate of the school, the number of enrolments at each school, and including whether any incident has led to hospitalisation or death. And the answer returned was the department has an obligation to maintain privacy and confidentiality of all staff and students and does not release incident data by schools. Releasing data by school may enable the identification of staff or students in schools that could be harmful to those involved and damage the reputation of schools. It could also act as a major disincentive to the future reporting of incidents. So I just wanted to clarify, effectively, in returning that answer, you said you have the information, that's correct, isn't it, Ms Harrison?
We do have information on incidents that are lodged with us, yes.
And the answer effectively says, we're not going to give you the information, isn't that correct?
I think the answer says that we are unable to give you that information in a form that would put it on the public record because of the considerations outlined in our answer.
You're obliged to provide answers where you have the information at hand, isn't that correct?
And so, as you will see from the answer, Mr Diadam, we sought advice on the appropriateness of handing that out from our General Counsel. The advice we've been given is what's relayed to you in the answer. We are not interested in withholding information from the committee. We do want to be able to answer you, but there are some instances where you would appreciate that in work health and safety matters there can be a number of complexities around those issues for the individual and the individual in their current workplace. And those are the issues that have been considered there. As I indicated, we're unable to share that data in such a way that would put it on the public record that might breach someone's privacy.
Did you, you're aware that the committee has a process which enables the information to be provided on a confidential basis, aren't you, Ms Harrison?
Yes, I am, but this was in a supplementary question that was not through that process.
Did you engage with the Secretariat to see if there was some other way you could meet the requirements of returning an honest and complete answer without necessarily...
I'm going to take a point of order to that, Chair.
Point of order.
The implication by the Honourable Anthony Diadam that Ms Harrison hadn't provided an honest answer, I think is...
I withdraw the suggestion that it was dishonest. So.
Thank you.
But did you obtain any advice from the Secretariat about how you might provide an answer that meets the requirements of the committee while also satisfying the concerns about privacy?
So, Mr Diadam, I'll take the specifics on notice of that question. The only thing I would add is that we received, I think it was in excess of 250 supplementary questions to be answered within the time frame, and so obviously the focus of the organisation was on getting those answers back in a timely fashion. If following this hearing you would like us to use that process to provide that information to you, we're certainly open to that. that process being used.
So is it possible to get an answer provided on a confidential basis to question 59?
I'm very happy to take that on notice and come back to you, Mr. Adam, on that basis.
So in question 60, you were asked about violent incidents. There were 8,806 violent incidents in 2020. The answer for 2021 is that there's no data available. What constitutes a violent incident? What's the sort of threshold?
And so I'll ask Ms. Catcher to provide you with an answer on that from the work health and safety perspective. And obviously Mr. Disdar and Ms. Nixon have experience of those issues in schools.
Sure, thanks, Secretary. So a violent incident refers to all assaults, intimidation, offensive conduct. Staff and community members are included in that category, and many of the incidents, as you'd appreciate, involve disputes, fighting between students.
And so what happens when you get a notification of a violent incident? What does the department do? What's the response?
Well, I'll ask my colleagues, Ms Nixon and Mr Disdar, to talk through the operational responses to those, but I can inform the committee that we work very closely with local police. We have regular consultations with them. We talk about trends and issues emerging in different regions and locations. So we are very much tied in with local agencies to make sure that people in schools are supported when these issues arise. From an operational perspective, obviously the principal and the school's leadership are the first port of call to make sure that those issues are managed on the school grounds. But we also then, of course, work closely with local area command to make sure that any of those violent incidents are managed more fulsomely. I'm not sure, Mr Diadam, if it would be useful for my colleagues to talk a little bit further about that.
Just wait for a moment. So I obviously read on the weekend about this terrible situation at Katoomba High School, and I note in the account that there was an initial report of harassment. So that would have been notified, wouldn't it, under your notification system?
I think if you're referring to Katoomba High School, it's important to note that there are current matters afoot in court, and I don't think it's appropriate to talk about the specifics of that matter. I can say that, as you can well imagine, we work, as I said, very closely with police, and when we are asked, and we are often asked while there's an investigation occurring, to put any kind of internal investigation on a pause while that investigation continues. But it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about the specifics of that matter while it is before the court.
So I'm concerned more about the procedural and I suppose what lessons the department has taken from whether the systems that were in place in relation to obviously what happened in Katoomba are robust to avoid a situation like that emerging again.
So
what can you say to the committee that will satisfy us that the systems are robust to avoid this situation emerging again?
So, Mr. Diadam, it would be our expectation that where the alleged incidents have occurred on a school site, they will be reported to our incident hotline. Where there are broader incidents in the community, they are often referred to the school, and the school will report them, but it is not always the case because it's not occurred on a school site. So if we have an incident on a school site, the policy and procedures are clear, and they should be reported, if there's a violent incident, to the incident reporting line.
Does Ms Nixon or Ms Disdar have anything further to
My operational experience is exactly what the Secretary indicates. Principals are acutely aware of their reporting responsibilities. I find that principals, in fact, over-report, and we support that. We say to them, no matter how big or small the matter may be, even if resolved at the school level and worked through, that the reports still take place. Exactly why Ms Cashier indicated, because our unit then can look at analysing trends that may occur in a school and make sure that that school gets the appropriate support if there's a pattern, for example, in a particular area or a particular locality or geography or a group of schools. And my operational experience, as I know Ms Nixon would confirm, is that then that support is galvanised.
Can I ask you about the answer then to question 133 in the supplementaries, where you're asked since 2011 how many acts of sexual assault have been reported in the toilets of New South Wales government schools, A, primary schools, and B, high schools. And the answer that you returned was the reporting system used by the Department of Education's Health and Safety Staff Wellbeing Directorate records the incident being reported occurred on or off school grounds only. So you're actually not collecting the data necessary to actually do the due diligence or the proper analysis. Isn't that correct, Mr Dister?
What I can say to the committee is my working knowledge of the reporting groups include violence, welfare, emergency situations, physical injury, criminal activity, weapons, health conditions, substances. So it'd be my expectation that if you're referring to, did you say, Mr Diadam, 133?
Yeah, the answer
and
to
that was
133.
sexual assault. Well, there's appropriate categories there in which that would be captured under by our health and safety experts that run that unit.
What are they?
And I'm happy to take on notice the exhaustive nature of those categories, because I've just gone off my working knowledge of some of those categories.
Can I ask about just general incident reporting? So if there's, obviously, serious incidents go to the Work Health and Safety Directorate, but in terms of behavioural incident reporting, how is that captured by the department? How do you monitor the issues that arise in terms of sort of minor behavioural incidents that might be, not a significant threat to the health and safety, like a kid,
Yeah.
I don't know, turns up their table or does something, sort of disruptive in a class that's, not consistent with good behavioural practice? Can you perhaps provide some information on
Mr Diadam,
that
every
process?
school's got to have their welfare and discipline structures, so they normally have and communicate with staff how to appropriately report both positive behaviour, because we want to encourage the right behaviour in schools, and what reward and award systems that leads to, alongside what negative behaviour monitoring is required. It's really important, your question, because it's often low-level things that could be reported across, for example, a Year 7 student across 7 subject areas, that then says to the welfare team and the year advisor, we need to intervene here. Something's going amiss. These aren't significant events that should lead to, for example, a suspension or an intervention with the family at that point, but there's enough low-level things that the teachers are reporting to for the year advisor and the welfare team to check in. So it's my working knowledge that schools have systems that they clearly articulate to their staff on how to undertake that process.
There's no consistent system across schools, is that what you're telling me?
As you'd expect, Mr Diadam, at Westfield Sports High School with 2,000 students or close to, they have a down-pat structure and a technology system that allows that to be the case. Whereas if I take you to Yo Park Infant School with, one class, it's a different structure and system that's utilised there. What's important is that the school has a clearly articulated welfare and discipline system that the staff understand, that the students understand, that the community understands.
Could I just follow up on that with the crossbench time? Question 133 was mine. And how can the department make a judgment about the design of new toilet blocks if it doesn't collect data about incidents, assault, sexual assault in certain types of toilet blocks?
I can answer that, Chair. We do collect the data in an incident report, so the information is available, but it is not available publicly, obviously, for obvious reasons. But that information is obviously held by the school in terms of feeding through to our directors of educational leadership and to our infrastructure teams as designs for schools are considered, etc. So I think, I agree with what Mr Dizdar has said there in terms of there's a point in time where you've got a policy response to things, and we've certainly got at that local level all of those, the hotline, the incident reporting, those local things in place. But also, we do feedback information around issues that are occurring in schools to the executive.
Well, if incident reporting is fed into design issues, how was it at Mona Vale Public? Parents have been left absolutely stunned that at that school 6 years ago, 2 12-year-old boys were arrested for raping a 6-year-old girl, and the response of the department was to say that happened in the toilets. So now what we're going to do with the new toilet block is have a common space where the boys and the girls intermingle, the boys' cubicles on the left, the girl cubicles on the right, one unisex at the end, but a common space between the boys and the girls under the one roof. Can you understand the absolute dismay of the parents that this has been the design response to that terrible incident 6 years ago?
Chair, I might ask Ms Nixon to answer that, and if I could just clarify in relation to the incident reporting, the locations are not in one of the kind of text box check, they're in the free text part of the report, which is why we weren't able to extract it and provide it in the answer. But I'll ask Ms Nixon to go to the specifics of Mona Vale.
So the toilet block you are referring to actually has an open hallway down the at the middle, so that teachers monitor that, and it is very visible to everyone. One side is the boys' toilets, one side is the girls' toilets, and it's monitored, as all toilet blocks are, during break times and during class times in most schools.
But how did the school respond to that incident in 2016?
I'm not
By thinking that a terrible thing had happened in the toilets, so the answer was to have a shared space. Isn't it logical that a separate space for boys' toilets, a separate space for girls' toilets, is the safest way of avoiding these sorts of problems?
And so, Chair, I think good design is a really important part of making sure we can avoid these problems. And certainly I've visited schools where all of the facilities are unisex, but every door or cubicle opens out onto a very visible area of the school. And so it is a really clear and safe space. As Ms Nixon said, we are at work with the Mona Vale school and community to address their concerns.
Well, the other concern was lack of consultation. I know you had a couple of P&C members on a consultative committee, but that doesn't mean that all the parents know about it. And there's a whole range of parents who say the first they knew about it was, some say, a notification to go to the school and inspect the design, which busy people haven't got time to do, and then when it was being built. So how did this lack of consultation, particularly after the dreadful incident in 2016, how was this allowed to happen?
And so, Chair, what I can say in response to that is that as soon as I was made aware of the situation at Mona Vale in relation to these toilets, and Ms Nixon escalated them to me, we put in place remediation immediately, and I'm very happy to provide with you on notice any details of what had occurred up until that point.
And why did the department fail to answer my question on the supplementaries about the number of new toilet designs where the girls' toilets in particular, the doors had to be replaced because with the case at Mona Vale, they weren't long enough, they weren't floor to ceiling, and there was an immediate problem of boys, for whatever reason, some pranks, some other reasons, thinking it was appropriate to put their head under the girls' cubicle door in the shared space.
And so, Chair, I don't have every supplementary question and answer with me, but I'm very happy to go away and find out what has occurred there and what we're able to provide you.
Is this a common problem with these new toilet designs, that the girls find boys are sticking their heads under the doors in the shared space? Or is it just Mona Vale?
We don't have any reports of that to suggest that it is something of significant concern, but I'm very happy to go away and have further conversations with the teams that lead that work.
But you are replacing the doors at Mona Vale, yes, to make them floor to ceiling. Can I get an answer then? I don't know why it wasn't given in the first place as to has this happened at other schools and what has been the cost involved in what's obviously a design flaw?
So one of the reasons we may not have been able to answer that is because of local works that occur by the schools, but I can certainly provide you on notice any that we're aware of at a central level that have been escalated to us and resolved through the asset management units and through our work. I will endeavour to get you the clearest answer we can, Chair.
Right, and why haven't boys got a urinal anymore at that school?
I'll need to take that on notice and come back to you, Chair.
You really need to take on notice the fundamental of how boys go to the toilet and why they haven't got a urinal at Mona Vale.
No, but in terms of the specifics of the design at Mona Vale School, I will need to take that away and come back to you, Chair.
As Secretary, could I ask Ms Harrison, did you find this amazing that what had been standard design of toilets, of separate areas and the boys having a urinal, has been discarded for some other theory as to how these areas would work? And have you looked at the Facebook posting about how these toilets operate? And wouldn't any normal, rational person think that's a less safe type of design compared to the traditional approach?
And Chair, I'll refer you back to my previous answer. As soon as Ms Nixon reported to me concerns with that toilet block design, I authorised Ms Nixon to press for works to occur to address the situation.
And will it be happening at other schools? Can we nip this in the bud to stop this problem from spreading under whatever weird design theory the department's now adopted for toilet blocks?
I can assure you, Chair, we'll be taking that seriously in our new designs, yes.
Okay. Can I now turn to the question that undoubtedly the department wrote the answer for the Minister in the Parliament last Thursday about what I raised with the 52,274 staff members with an employment ID number, a departmental email address, but a blank space under vaccination status in the spreadsheet. And the answer came back to say that only school staff that were currently being paid could attest up until the 27th of January. And the bigger number now is a product of so-called inactive staff being included on that spreadsheet. What's the definition used for being paid?
So it would be that you have had a pay period in which we have paid you in a specific period of time prior to that point. And so, Chair, in collecting that data, we pulled off all of the records relating to staff in order to then work out who was captured by the public health order and who wasn't. And of course, we have focused our attention very much on those teachers that are active in our system and working on our school sites. The number you referred to would include teachers that have separated from the department, who have retired, a whole number of reasons. We haven't taken their departmental files away, and their records still sit with us, and so they come up in those systems.
What's the pay period then, you mentioned?
I'll ask Ms Catcher to provide some
fortnight,
further.
a month?
It's fortnightly, but I just think it's worth clarifying. As the Secretary said, the reason from the 27th of January why that number of inactive staff appeared on the document that I think you have, Chair, is because we wanted to make sure that if people who were inactive, that is, as the Secretary said, have an inactive engagement, they're not actively currently working on one of our school sites, we want to make sure that before they returned to a school site, should they decide to re-engage with the department to work with us, that they were able to go on and vaccitest. And we see this as part of any other credentialing that you need to do, working with children check, criminal background check, etc., etc. So I think it's a useful cohort to have at the ready, because we do have, as you can imagine, we've got a very large workforce. We need to have the ability that anybody who's deciding to re-engage with us to work can go onto that vaccitest system and can actually attest. The other part of that cohort, Chair, are new teachers, so people who are joining the department and getting up to speed in terms of their accreditation. It forms a suite of all those administrative things that they need to do to be able to safely work on one of our sites.
So you're saying that if there's a casual who worked in a school a month ago for a week, but they're not in the current pay period, they're defined as inactive?
No, they would be captured because they're currently engaged within the system to work. But
how far back in time does that engagement go?
I'll have to take the specific around what cut off from an engagement. You can imagine a casual teacher works on a day-to-day basis. That's how they're engaged. That's the nature of their employment. But many of them work in different schools for periods of time. So those people are already captured, because if you've worked lately, you would be part of the casual cohort that's already attested.
So
but you must know, for the purposes of providing this answer and the information system in front of you, what the cut-off time is. Is it a fortnight? The Secretary said it's payment in the past fortnight. Ms Cashy is saying it's some other time period. Is it a fortnight, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6,
Sorry,
10,
Chair, if I caused
15?
Some confusion there. It was that they had been paid in a recent pay period, not necessarily the last pay period. We'll take on notice
What
the
defines
specifics.
recent?
We'll take on notice the specifics of that.
I might just raise the point of order that Ms Harrison is trying to provide an answer, and obviously if you're asking a supplementary question of her, one, while she's trying to talk, it makes it difficult for Hansard. Two, she's obviously trying to concentrate on the answers that she's giving, and that it might just
What are
be...
you saying? I'm interrupting.
I was trying to do it in a nice way, Chair, yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, what is the cut-off for being active as opposed to inactive on this list?
I will take the specifics of that on notice. Obviously, you'll appreciate we have long-serving staff who accrue significant amount of leave, who might take long periods of leave without pay as part of their employment with us. So it will be a reasonable period, and so I'll come back to you on notice on that, if I may.
I think the point to note, Chair, is that if you're a casual teacher who has been inactive and then you've engaged with the system, you vaccitest. We make sure that anyone working on our school sites is vaccinated and in compliance with the public health order. We're after, in that cohort of people, capturing people who, as the Secretary has said, may have been on leave for some time and may be due to come back at some point in the future. And we want to make sure that they've got that at the ready so that they can adhere to that public health order requirement as required.
Oh, yes, I understand what's said to be the purpose of this, but I'm just trying to get my head around the fact that you've come to this hearing, having provided the answer on Thursday, and can't actually define what active and inactive means for the purpose of this question. And I'd also like to know, well, how many are active among the 52,274 and how many are defined as inactive?
Happy to provide those answers on notice, Chair. I would say, obviously, the judgment we are making here is that we do not want to be chasing after people for vaccination status updates who are not required to give one, which is why we have a kind of a reasonableness test around that cut-off. I'm very happy to come back with the specifics on notice.
I've got the active numbers as well for the Chair if you
Yep.
require. Those active
what are
people
they?
are, so in terms of fully vaccinated, 98.8% of our workforce is vaccinated. That's 128,183 school staff. 0.1% are partially vaccinated. That's 137 people. 0.6% are not vaccinated. That's 828 people. 0.5% have a medical contraindication that's been recognised by the department in accordance with the ATAGI guidelines, and that amount is 613. In terms of corporate, would you like me to go on, Chair?
Well, no, we've had these numbers before, and it's one of the reasons we're here, that whenever I ask this question about those who haven't attested a vaccination status, I get those particular answers. But I'm asking for who among the 52,274 are active staff and how many are inactive, and what is the definition of active and inactive. And one of the frustrations this committee is garnering is that certain answers can be given, but ones that perhaps don't suit the the question of controversy or the suit the department. There's no answer available at these hearings. How hard is it, having given this answer into the Parliament on Thursday, to have a clear definition of active versus inactive, and how many are in those categories among the 52,274? Why, Ms Casier, can you give me that data, but not the data I'm actually seeking?
I can give you the explanation, Chair, and we are here to help the committee understand the processes, so apologies if it's not clear. I think we can say, from the numbers that I've just given you, that those people are what we call active. They are actively going onto school sites to work. There's a cohort of people, as we said in that larger number that you have, who may not have been on site for some time.
What time period? What time period?
It will depend on when they choose to come and work for us, Chair. So as soon as, if you're a casual teacher and you haven't worked for 6 months, before you go onto a school site to work on a day for us, you need to vaccitest. A casual is engaged on a day-to-day basis. So once they've attested once, they're in the system as active, even if they subsequently decide, hey, I'm not going to teach for 3 weeks because I've got something else I need to do.
But of these 52,274,
Yes.
how many are active versus inactive? Because it's a big number. It's a huge part of the people on your system, your workforce system, that haven't attested a vaccination status.
So our understanding is they are all inactive. From recollection...
They're all inactive now.
They are the 52,000 are the inactive, and by inactive from recollection, but I did just want to check the specifics because I don't have it here in my notes. It's around 18 months, the cut-off for being active or considered active versus inactive, so you won't have been paid within an 18-month period, the previous 18-month period, there or thereabouts, but I can confirm the very specifics of that on notice.
Well, why then did the Minister, with the answer written by the Department, furnish to the Parliament material saying that that 52,000 included active and inactive, if they're actually all inactive?
And so let me take the specifics of that on notice, Chair. In jumping to saying the 52,000, I may have been too eager to assist you, but that 52,000 by bulk will have been people who have been inactive over the last 18 months. It may include a small number of people who are on paid parental leave or similar, or unpaid parental leave, who are returning to work and therefore starting to become active in our system. So there will be a grey area between the active and inactive.
I think a good way to think of it, Chair, and a helpful way perhaps, is to think of the inactive as people who haven't yet attested. Once you've attested for us, you don't need to reattest. So these are people who haven't
I've now
worked.
found out the 52,000, they're all inactive, and 18 months is the cut-off. Why wasn't that the answer five minutes ago?
And so, Chair, I did just check with my colleague, my recollection being 18 months. That is my recollection, but I just want to make sure we give you, as I said on notice, the confirmation of that.
Okay. All these 52,000 have got an employment ID number. If you're retired from the teaching service 10 years ago, how do you keep an employment ID number on your systems?
So I might ask Mr. Withy to provide some detail on that, just in terms of our payroll system and why we would maintain people on there for a period of time.
I would have to take the details of that on notice in terms of when employee IDs are rolled off, when an employee has been inactive for a period of time. But I can come back to you, hopefully, at some point later in this hearing.
Okay, you're the Chief Operating Officer, but you can't tell us when a person loses their employment ID number because they've written to you and said, I'm retiring now, I'm finished, or I'm resigning. Wouldn't normal practice be that you lose your employment ID number when you finish in the teaching service by resignation, retirement, or some other means?
No, Chair, I think normal practice would probably be that number was retained for a period of time. What I'm not able to confirm, but I will take that question on notice, is what that period of time is.
Right. What if someone dies? Do they keep their employment ID number?
So again, within the system, I would anticipate there's a period of time where that employee ID number is retained in the system. At some point it will be rolled off, but I would have to take that period on notice.
And Mr. Disdar can provide you with some of the practical reasons as to why that would occur, Chair.
Chair, one of the boxes on the retirement form for those with a teaching background is would they want a casual ID number, whether they intend to at that point straight after retirement or down the track. And it's my experience that most with a teaching background tick that box so they can have a casual number that verifies that they're of good character, good standing when they're working in the department. And these are some of the people who we've then employed under the COVID Intensive Learning Support Program. They've got the beauty of choosing when they want to work and if they want to work, and from time to time they undertake casual work in school. So you'll find those with a teaching background on retirement, you know, the vast majority will tick the box to say, I want a casual number, and we'll have that number in the system with them, and will become active at different points in time post those years.
Okay. Can I just ask, in relation to the answer the department wrote for the Minister and the Minister gave to the LC on the 22nd of February, which was on the same topic of non-attested staff, why wasn't mention provided in that answer of the 52,274 who have an ID number, a department email address, but a blank space? That is, they haven't attested a vaccination status. If this was true as of the 22nd of February, why wasn't it provided in the answer to the Parliament?
I'll ask Ms. Catcher to provide you with some detail, Chair.
The reason is, Chair, that what we're doing here. I think we need to go back to the purpose of vaccination attestation. The purpose of vaccination attestation is to make sure that the health of our students and staff is paramount and that we're complying with the public health order. So ordinarily, whether someone's inactive or active is not relevant. What is really relevant for the committee is the number of people we've got working in our schools and the number of those people who are compliant with the public health order. If somebody's retired and they've been retired for a few years and they're not coming back, some of them, as Mr Disdar said, come back as casuals for our casual workforce. If they come back as a casual, they will attest before they attend a school site. So I think it's important to just think of this cohort as a way of making sure it's like a safety net. We can capture anyone who needs to vax attest because they then need to attend a school site. Anyone else in the numbers we've already given the committee, and these numbers change regularly. I think from the 18th to the 27th of March, we've had over 800 new attestations. So the numbers of inactive to active are constantly changing.
Okay, I'll come back and try and get an answer to the question that I asked the opposition.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. Ms Harrison, I wanted to come to the issue of the rezoning of schools in Queanbeyan. This is something that we asked several questions about in the House this week, and in response to a supplementary question for written answer, the Minister replied and said around consultation. Consultation has been ongoing since the 27th of May 2020 with approximately 12 consultation meetings occurring during this time. Can you tell us who that consultation occurred with?
I'll ask Mr Disdar to talk to the specifics of the rezoning you're referring to.
Ms Hussos, this is rezoning in Queanbeyan with 2 new high schools and 1 primary school coming on board.
Yep.
So it's a necessary part of the operational requirement there.
Sorry, just with 1 primary school coming on board?
These are new schools, 1 new primary school and 2 high schools.
Being Jerromabombera, being Googong Primary School and Jerromabombera High School and Bungendore High School, is that correct? Yep.
Correct, Ms Hussos. So with, and it's quite unusual to get 3 schools in that sort of proximity and geography all coming online together, and that's necessitated boundary adjustments for all surrounding schools, because our premise in public education is to try and make sure that every school is a viable and strong public school by way of both current enrolments and projections of future enrolments. What my understanding is, having spoken to our educators on the ground there, is that we have consulted with all of the relevant principals in that locality around what the boundary adjustments need to look like. My understanding is that we consulted with the regional P&C president for the area, and upon release of the boundaries, we have indicated and provided a feedback form to the community, have contacted each of the P&C presidents. I think upwards of 15 different P&C presidents to make sure that they're across the feedback form. And if I've got it right, we've given until week 2 in term 2 to make sure we attain all the necessary feedback and make any adjustments to those boundaries that we've put out into the public.
So, Mr Disdar, I'm sure you're right across the fact that the regional P&C president, I mean, you just said that he was consulted with. He's been very clear publicly and said he was briefed on the changes. Can you just tell me, what is the consultation process? What do you consider the consultation process to be?
Well,
let me say this. When I consider consultation, I think that you are presented with the information and offered the opportunity to provide feedback that they may then influence the outcome. It's very different to being briefed saying, this is what we are going to announce. Now, the regional P&C president, as I'm sure you're aware, was briefed on the changes the day before they were announced.
Sure. Ms Hussos, it's a very good question, and it will vary from context to context. If we've got an established school and we're looking at moving one street, for example, in that boundary, we may well consult with the school principal and the P&C president, and it may not require what we've done here in Queanbeyan with a public opportunity for a feedback form.
Sorry, Mr. Disdar, before we talk about what's going on now, let's talk about what happened before the announcement. Let's not conflate the two issues. Let's be really clear. I'm asking questions about what occurred prior to the announcement. I understand there's a feedback form. I understand parents have the opportunity now to participate. I'll ask some questions about that afterwards. I'm asking now specifically about what happened before the decision was announced.
Sure, and I'm more than willing to assist as best as I can with your questions, Ms. Usos, and I think I did that in the coverage by indicating that we consulted with the principals. I used the word that we consulted with the P&C regional president. I think you're saying that's not consultation, Murad, it's informed or briefed on. I'm happy to take that on notice. What I got informed was that there was a consultation with the regional P&C president. I indicated that on release of the feedback forms, we've made contact with all of the relevant P&C presidents to make them available, and we have a thorough public consultation that's out there and should be the case.
Okay, so Mr. Disdar, the answer that was provided to the chamber or to myself said that there were 12 consultation meetings that occurred between the 27th of May and prior to the announcement. All of those meetings, when you say that there are 12 with the local principals, is that who the consultations were with?
Ms. Usos, I'd have to take it on notice if those principles were done as a group all together or were done in geographical groups or individually. I'm not across that. What I do know is that they're all consulted with, but I'd have to take on notice the specifics of what that looked like.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing those consultations. Were they just with principals? Who was in those meetings?
Sure. So let me take the detail on
Of
notice,
course.
because that's a bit of detail that you're after that I don't have in front of me.
Yep, that's not a problem. Now, can you tell me if any of those consultations occurred with the local Member of Parliament?
Around the boundary changes?
Yes.
I would have to take that on notice. I'm not sure myself.
Okay. Are you aware if the local MP was briefed prior to the announcement of the boundaries?
Yeah, I'd have to take that on notice. What I do know is that the local MP is briefed of the public feedback process that we've created. I do know that we've been in contact with her at an executive director level and director level on the ground, and taken her across what the boundary changes, the suggested boundary changes are, the community feedback mechanisms are, the contact we've made with P&C presidents. But I'd have to take on notice your specific question about whether there was any briefing prior to the release of the boundaries. I'm not across that.
Okay, and if you can just tell us if there was a briefing of the local MP when that occurred.
Yeah, separate to the briefings I've indicated.
I understand.
Sure. You're asking me prior to the release? And
Prior to the release. My questioning is specifically about prior to the release.
Sure. Let me take that on notice and come back to you.
Thanks very much. I'm interested. So usually when I understand what you're saying, this is a very significant change in terms of new schools
Yes.
coming online.
Yes.
And so there's a need for a bit more of a radical redrawing perhaps than there normally is.
Yes.
Are you able to tell me if usually when redrawing school boundaries, the local MP is consulted?
Normally, it's my operational practice and coverage that we would take the local MP across that.
Usually you would.
Of anything of significance that impacts on multiple schools, not the one street example I gave you, but
I
multiple
understand.
schools. Normally, we would.
Okay.
We would.
And usually is there a public consultation process?
No, that's not my experience. Normally, we would. What we would do is we would certainly work with the principals of the new schools, the impacted schools, the geography that we're covering. We certainly would intersect with the P&Cs because they've got current children in the system and have a strong vested interest in what that would look like. They would be givens of how we go about the consultation. We wouldn't necessarily do an open feedback forum that allowed anyone from anywhere to give input into.
Okay, but you would understand, Mr. Disdar, that families that move into areas often do closely consult with school boundaries.
They do.
It is part of the consideration when a family moves into an area.
They do.
And I just want to be clear, you're saying that at the moment, if there is a change to that school zoning prior to them starting school, that there is no consultation with those families.
Well, Ms Hussos, as you'd appreciate, and we've given this answer in other budget estimates hearing, with the revised enrolment policy, if you're in area for a school and the enrolment boundary changes and you've got siblings, you're still able to attend that school because you're in area when you were living there. The boundaries have been changed by the system, so you're still entitled to attend. So they aren't, a person in that situation may not be aware of the enrolment policy, but they're actually not impacted. If they've got a sibling, they can still attend because we're the ones that have changed the boundary. It's for subsequent and future enrolments.
Yes, but there are still families who are affected who would have strong views, and you're just explaining that they have no ability to feed into that process at all.
No, I'm not indicating that at all, Ms Hussos. What I'm indicating is that under the policy, they've got a safeguard in place, which is great, and I concur wholeheartedly that, and I said that on major changes of this kind, we would consult with the P&Cs of the relevant schools. They have an important voice to provide in any subsequent changes.
Okay. Are you able to tell me when the brief was prepared that advised the minister that you were considering changes to the schools, to the zonings?
I could do that on notice. I don't know that we would have asked the minister to note the changes.
I understand that.
It's an operational matter, so we would have asked them to note it.
Would the minister have been told prior to the local consultations beginning on the 27th of May?
I'll have to take on notice, like I said, when the brief was sent to the minister's office.
Okay. I'm interested in knowing if the minister was alerted to the start of the process.
Well, let me take that on notice because that goes to the concept of the briefing that you're referring to.
Yep. And I'm also interested to know if the minister was briefed through the process.
Sure, I can take that on notice.
And then when the final decision was made, when the minister was briefed on the final decision.
Well, there hasn't been a final decision. That's why we're out in consultation with the community. The final decision won't be until midterm 2. The consultation will close on Friday of week 2 in term 2. We'll have to take the feedback on board and you would expect us to be diligent with that feedback. There may well be information that's brought to our attention through that forum that says that we need to recalibrate those boundaries that we've gone out with. You know, when you seek feedback, there may be some good pertinent views that have come through that need to be taken into account, and we will then provide a final briefing of note to the minister with what we suggest as a department should be those final boundaries.
Okay. How many times have you previously reviewed decisions using this kind of feedback mechanism?
In my operational experience, boundary adjustments are a constant. I've been formerly the executive director in what was Ultimo. So I was in Sydney in a part of the state where there's strong growth and demand for public education, so boundaries were constantly being monitored, adjusted, considered. Another large-scale one in Sydney recently that we spoke to the committee on. So, you know, my operational experience is that these are constant. We're always examining the planning data. We're always listening to our principals around what current enrolments and future enrolments look like. Because I said to the committee, our job is to make sure that every public school is a viable and strong public school. So, you know, it's a constant, and it's certainly a given when you're looking at a new build.
So, Mr. Disdar, if you can provide on notice, I don't expect you to have this here today, how many boundary changes for schools there have been this year, last year and the year before that, by calendar year?
Yeah, why don't we do our best, Ms Hussos?
I appreciate that, thank you.
On how many boundary changes, noting that they vary from moving one street to what we're describing here.
I understand, and I'm happy if you want to make that distinction between minor and more significant changes, but I'm interested in how many.
We'll work with our school infrastructure colleagues and see what data we've got.
I appreciate that, thank you. And Mr. Disdar, I'm interested to know what is the standard process for consultation that usually occurs? So I understand you've outlined a process that's gone on for I think it started in May last year. Obviously, the announcement in March, that's quite a significant period of time. Is that the normal process? Consultations with local principals, consultation or briefing of the local P&C rep, if that's the normal process, and if this public feedback is usually provided as well.
Yeah, so the bare bones of a normal process where there's a number of schools impacted,
Yep.
Ms Housos, would be the principals being briefed, would be the relevant P&Cs being briefed, and mechanisms to capture input from the P&Cs, such as the feedback form we've used. On ones that impact on multiple schools, on ones that are more smaller in scale is what I'm trying to describe, that won't be necessary.
So when you say you brief the local P&Cs, does that mean you go to the local P&C specific or the specific local P&C affected, or does that mean you brief the regional P&C and you expect that their process briefs them?
It could be both, Ms Housos. It could be the regional P&C and it could be then the relevant P&Cs. It could be phone contact to indicate on what the information looks like. It could be attendance at P&C meetings.
Okay, can you take that part on notice to tell me whether you do usually attend local P&Cs or whether you usually brief the regional P&C?
I'm not sure that we need to take that on notice, Ms Housos, because what I'm trying to help you with is to indicate that we would make contact with the relevant P&Cs. That could be for the P&C president, and it could be the coverage of the info and that suffices, or it could be that they want us to attend a P&C meeting as well. But
Mr. Disdale,
contact is made, information is provided, and the feedback mechanism is then, availed of.
Yeah, Mr. Disdale, what I'm interested to know is there a document in the department where you go, right, we're changing the boundaries, let's pull out this 10-step process, and I'm interested if you can just provide that with me on notice. I mean, I would place on the record, I would reiterate what the chair said, which is we did find some of those answers to questions on notice provided last time were quite evasive. I'm looking for a specific step-by-step process. Obviously, we have other avenues that are available in the House to try and pursue to find those documents if we need to. Let's save us all some time. Let's just get, if there's a 10-step process, what's that 10-step process?
And I don't need to take that on notice. There isn't a step-out document.
So there isn't?
There isn't a step-out document on boundary changes. What I've been unpacking...
Sorry, I misunderstood. There is or there isn't?
There isn't a step-out document on boundary changes. What I've been explaining to yourself and the committee is how we operationalise small and larger boundary changes.
But surely there's some kind of standard operating procedure that if you're going to have or are you saying that you reinvent the process every time that there's a boundary change?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the operational arm of the department, which is the directors and executive directors that work with school infrastructure, have an operational way of going about this that's well known and well understood, and enact that to good effect. Okay,
but I'm just trying to get a sense. There's community uproar down in Jerromabombera in particular, and I'm sure you would be aware of that. I've seen several emails that were sent and addressed directly to you, Mr. Disdale. I know I've received many representations on this issue. I know that the department is receiving representations on this issue. I know the local MP is receiving representations on this issue. I know that you've established a special website to provide feedback on this specific issue. So it's clearly a red hot issue. I'm interested to know whether this is the way school boundary changes are normally handled, or whether this is different.
So what we've done, I'm across the correspondence you referred to. I've had people write to myself. It's been captured as part of the feedback. Let me reiterate to the committee, this is a good problem to have. This is 3 brand new public schools coming on board that are necessitating the boundary changes in a very close together geography of existing schools. So this isn't boundary changes that are just being thought of on the cuff of a whim or wanting to make adjustments to schools. This is being necessitated by 3 new schools, and a thorough process has been put in place after engagement with the principals and the regional P&C to make sure we're capturing.
I think it's important, Mr. Disler. I don't like interrupting you. I don't like interrupting you, but I think it's really important because you've just repeated that the regional P&C was consulted.
And I'm just
going to correct you. No, Wes, you don't need to. My time's about to run out. But I think it's really important
I'm going to take the
that we
point.
don't do that.
I'm going to continue taking the point of order.
Wes,
You've actually just admitted, Ms Usos, that you've interrupted him
And
while
I've
he's
been
trying to make the
very
answer.
patient.
Well, I think 18 minutes of questioning because Bryce lost the seat twice is probably not the best way to use your time.
Okay, well, we won't take that as a point of order. We'll just move on to the questioning, please.
And if the Deputy Chair wants to start with personal assessment and personal character assessments, then we can start. But let's just have a productive day, shall we?
We shall.
Yep.
I just don't know if it's
Next
productive.
question, please.
Mr. Disler, can you tell us how many of these boundary changes have been reviewed previously and overturned?
Ms Usos, I've done my best to answer your question. It's a similar one to one you asked earlier. We are constantly looking at boundary changes. They are an everyday practice in schools, particularly in schools that are experiencing growth, particularly in schools where there's new schools slated in its surrounds. These are constant things operationally that principals, directors and infrastructure are looking at. It is my experience that when we take P&C feedback, principal feedback, in the normal processes we use, we make adjustments to boundaries. We make adjustments in line with that feedback. That's why we've gone out in this locality to get the feedback.
We're just about to run out of time. I've just got one question on this.
Allow me to finish. If there's sensible and poignant feedback that we have missed in releasing those boundaries, we'll need to make adjustments to them.
Mr. Disler, I'm happy if you want to take it on notice. If you can just provide me, you've told me you'll take on notice the number of them taken. If you can tell me the number of those that have changed as a result of public consultation outside of the department.
What I'll do, Ms Usos, is take it on notice and work with my infrastructure colleagues to see if we keep that data. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Could I just ask, is it still the department's answer that of this 52,274, they're all inactive going back 18 months?
And so, Chair, I think the thing I just want to make sure we're clear on in this is that 52,000 people are people who are not required to be vaccinated, and that's why we have them as inactive and we're not pursuing them. They need to be, in order to be considered inactive, it's as I said before, it's 18 months since you've been active in the system. If you haven't been active in the system, we don't need you to be vaccinated, and so we're not going to come and ask you to vax-attest in our system. I believe the number updates quite regularly, and it's a kind of live number on the system. And so I understand that as of today, it's around 44,000 inactive on the system, with that figure constantly in flux, as either people are removed and rolled off the system in the process we indicated earlier, or become active and therefore are required to get vaccinated and to attest in the system.
Can you explain then how I've been able in the last couple of days to speak to several of your staff who work for you every day who've been able to find their employment ID number on that list?
And so, Chair, I would need to take that specific on notice. That is not something I would be aware of. I can ask Ms Catcher if she has any further information.
Ms Catcher, how can I speak to a number of your staff who work for you every day who find their number on the employment ID list of what was the 52,000, now the 44,000? How can that be possible?
I think, as the Secretary said, we're happy to investigate that and come back to you, but I suspect that the reason is because of that cohort in inactive who are not vax-attested or perhaps haven't been working for us for a while. They haven't been compliant with the public health order, and because they haven't worked for us for a while, their employee ID would show up on that list.
They worked for you last week every day.
If they worked on a school site, is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying where they work, but they work for the department and were paid by the department every day last week.
I will have to take that on notice. That's highly unusual, and I'd need to know the specifics.
It's very unusual. Could I just come to my frustrations?
Can I just say, if we do have those issues in our data, we of course want to make sure we are going through and clarifying that and ensuring the data is accurate. I'm very happy to come back to you on notice with those clarifications.
Okay, can I just come to my frustration? I've tried 4 different ways to get a number on the casual staff who've been identified as non-compliant. On your records, I've tried through the Parliament, through estimates, through a question on the notice paper, then the supplementary. The supplementary answer you gave last time was to refer to question on notice 8383, which was a non-answer. Why is the department so reluctant to give the number of casuals on your database who are non-compliant with the public health order?
Those casuals, I'll take that, Chair. Those casual, it's because of the nature of the way casuals work. So in our workforce, we've got permanent full-time teachers, we've got temporary teachers, we have casual teachers. When you're a casual teacher, your engagement with the department begins and ends on any given day. The casuals who are currently working in active engagements in schools will be vaccinated and will be part of the numbers that we provide the committee in any forum, either this or on notice, and that number changes regularly, as the Secretary said, because a casual may not have worked for a while and then decides to work. We don't investigate casual non-compliance because those people only work from day to day or for periods of time. What we do is we approach it by saying, if you are a casual teacher and you are engaged with us, when you come onto a school site, you need to have vaccinated so we can be sure that casual teachers who are working on site are vaccinated and are vaccinated, and casuals who are inactive for whatever reason, working somewhere else, doing something else, are part of that inactive list.
Right. The Minister on the 22nd of February, in this answer to me from matters raised last year in the Parliament, said as follows: correspondence was also sent to approximately 1,000 casual and temporary staff who were also identified as non-compliant, advising of their allegation of misconduct and they couldn't teach on a school site. What's the latest number there of how many casuals have been advised by the department that they're non-compliant and they're ineligible to teach?
It's about characterisation, so it's not simply saying you're non-compliant. What we've done, Chair, and we did this when Novavax came out, we wrote to everybody and told them that if you want to re-engage with the department as an employee, whether that's casual, temporary or permanent, you would need to be vaccinated. So that's why we wrote to them and told them that, because we want to make sure that before people come onto site, they're compliant with the PHO.
Right, you did that for Novavax. When you say you wrote to everyone, how many people was that?
I'll have to take the specifics of the exact number of how many letters we've sent to people on notice, Chair, but the substance of what I'm saying is that we want to make sure that people are compliant. That's the overall objective and purpose, and therefore if you're a casual teacher with a casual number, we have written to you to tell you that we'd like you to be aware that before you come and re-engage with us, you will need to vaccine.
Right, but you did that for Novavax, saying what, Novavax is now available, please go and have the vaccine, and if you do that, you'll be able to
I
teach.
used Novavax as one example of a letter of communication that we wrote to our staff, but we prior to that and well before the public health order came into effect on the 8th of November last year, we wrote to our staff several times to inform them about the changes in the public health order and what it meant for their employment.
And Ms Kasia, have you got any recollection of the email that was sent to you by Justin Cheong, the Senior Briefing and Correspondence Officer, on the Wednesday the 23rd of February, subject for approval, unattested staff and ECPC flag?
Chair, I think if there are questions, if I may ask, about specific documents, it would be useful if we could have access to them.
Well, it's Ms Kasia's own email that was sent to her by her Senior Briefing and Correspondence Officer. What is
Chair,
an ECPC flag?
If I may, in terms of just due process, it would be helpful for Ms Catcher to be able to assist the committee if she had a copy of that in front of her. She may or may not be able to access her email from February.
I'm asking her a question. Has she got a recollection
Chair, can I
of the email sent to her by Justin Cheong on the 23rd of February about unattested staff and an ECPC flag?
Chair, could I just raise the point of order that perhaps what might be a more fairer option is that Ms Kutcher be permitted to recall the email, and perhaps this line of questioning could be done after the break, just so she has an opportunity to read it and refresh her.
I'm assuming that the Chief People Officer would have a recollection of this. It was a week before our last estimates hearing, and she responded to the email. It was headed unattested staff and the ECPC flag. What is that flag?
So ECPC is the question, Chair. What is ECPC? Is that the question? ECPC is a system whereby it's like a flagging system, Chair. So if you go onto, say you're a casual teacher and you go onto a school site to do a day's work as a casual, you attend the site. You may have worked somewhere else last week, so you're already vaccinated. If you're not attested, the school staff member who's charged with looking at your vaccination status will have a flag in the system. And also if you're booking a casual for the day, there'll be a flag to say whether or not somebody is attested. If they're not attested, that flag will come up. That's what the ECPC system is.
That's what the flag is. And can you remember how many people you told were flagged and not attested?
Oh, Chair,
As a product of this?
I really want to be helpful to you and answer the question, but I probably, unless I can see the email and give some consideration to it, you'll appreciate that Justin Chung works in my team. He handles hundreds of pieces of correspondence every day, so I would need to have a look at that to be able to give you a fulsome answer.
Well, he was seeking your approval and you gave it straight away to send a letter to 9,000 staff that they had this flag, that they weren't attested and they weren't eligible to work in schools. Do you remember he also said you were sending out a text message to each of the 9,000?
We work as People Group works very closely with COVID Task Force, and obviously we work through as an executive team the processes that we're going to follow as a department to comply with the public health order. And it may well be, I haven't seen the email that you have from my team, but I would say that it is very much part and parcel of the administrative process and procedures we follow to make sure that we're constantly reminding our staff who are not attested that they do need to be attested before they attend a school site for work.
Yeah, so there were 9,000 casuals ineligible to set foot on a school site as of the 23rd and the 24th of February. Why then, 6 or 7 days later, when I asked those questions at the Estimates Committee, you said you'd take it on notice, you said it was easy to access, you'd come back later that day, you never did, and then you still haven't provided the number. Why is it, Ms Cashier, that it takes a Member of Parliament to find a document for you to actually give the truth to this committee?
Mr Latham, I do give the truth to this committee. That's
Why
what we're
didn't you
all
in
here
this
to do.
instance, 6 days earlier,
I can answer
you
the question,
authorised 9,000 letters going out to casuals. I asked how many had gone out. You said it was easy to access. And a month later, here at this hearing, you still hadn't provided the information.
So, Chair, I will answer the question. I am here to tell the truth, and that's what I do on every occasion. Firstly, I don't think that there's anything untoward here. I think that casuals will make a decision to attend a school site at any given time. So the number is constantly moving. It's not a static number. We have new casuals coming into the system who may not have worked for months. And so the number constantly moves. And in terms of your reference to, on the last occasion, me not coming back, I may not simply have had the opportunity to do that. I apologise if I didn't do that, but certainly happy to give an updated number on notice. But the number constantly changes, Chair, and that's why it looks like it's a number I should have mentioned on the last occasion. That number now would be quite different to the document you have, which I haven't seen.
I'm talking about the 2nd of March when I asked what was the number. And you said you'd come back later that day. You didn't. I asked the supplementary. It was also taken on notice. And no number was provided. The only reference that was given was for me to go to my own question 8383 when, again, no number was given. So, Ms Cashier, the number was clear. It was 9,000. And it's in an email that was sent to you by Mr Chung. Do you remember... do you recall on Thursday, the 24th of February at 9:30am, when he said he was sending the letters and the SMS out to the 9,000, you answered approved?
Chair, if I may, I think Ms Catcher has indicated that she's very happy to consider the email and provide you with the information in response to it. I am conscious that she is currently commenting on numbers and data which she may not have have the full context of without the information in front of her. So I would appreciate her having the opportunity to consider that, because I do want to make sure the committee is given the information that you're requesting.
As the Secretary, do you acknowledge there was every opportunity, in fact 5 opportunities, to provide that 9,000 number, and a deliberate attempt was made to keep this committee in the dark?
I do not accept that there has been any deliberate attempt to keep the committee in the dark. I do not have the questions in front of me that you're referring to. I do not have the email in front of me. I can't confirm they're asking for the same thing. I'm very happy to take it away and look at it as I've indicated and make sure that we are giving the committee the right information.
Well, I asked 5 times for this number, and 6 days earlier, the Chief People Officer authorised an email from her staff member to send a letter out to the 9,000. And apparently there's been no recollection of that in the month since. Not on the day, not on the supplementaries, not on notice, and not earlier under questioning. Can I go to Mr. Withy? Mr. Withy, do you recall also approving this particular email from Mr. Chung and sending out the 9,000 on Thursday, the 24th of February? You wrote ditto.
Again, I don't have the email in front of me. I received,
I'm not asking that. I'm asking, do you recall approving the 9,000 on the 24th of February?
So without the detail of the email in front of me, I don't have immediate recall of that, but very happy to look at the
Okay,
email
and you were happy to sit here at this estimates knowing the 9,000 number and never pipe up and say it was 9,000?
So again, I don't have immediate recall of that number. We deal with an inordinate large volume of emails into my office and Ms. Catshier's office every day. Very happy to take a look at the detail of that email and come back to you on those.
Chair, could I just add to supplement that, and I hope this is going to be of assistance. That 9,000 casuals does not mean that they are non-compliant. All it means is that they haven't yet attested, but they haven't also worked at one of our sites. So as they decide that they want to re-engage, and they may not decide, so that group will be different now. So it won't be 9,000, it'll be a smaller number perhaps, because somebody will say, hey, I want to do some casual teaching. And then they'll attest, and then they'll go on to a school site. So the 9,000 doesn't bear necessarily a correlation between people who are non-compliant, and they won't be investigated for non-compliance. We're simply writing to them as a department to say, hey, you're on our records as a casual teacher, and if you want to come and work for us on any given day, we would require you to vaccitest so that you can be compliant with the public health order. I think that's all this is about. As the Secretary and Mr. Withy have said, we're more than happy to have a look at the exact emails that you have a copy of, and we'll provide the committee with a fulsome response. But that is what I suspect.
What this is about is that you knew the number, you were asked the number, and you didn't provide the information when asked. That's the problem.
Well, Ms. Cashier, just on what you've said then, what you think this email is about, and it is an email that was sent to you from your staff. Why then would Mr. Chong say at the beginning of the email, I'm following up on the next steps from our executive paper, so it wasn't just an email, it's an executive paper on unattested staff and the placement of the flag, which includes 1, notifying active staff, not inactive, active staff of the requirement to attest prior to being engaged by a school. So these are active staff who are being told you can no longer work in a school. Isn't that correct?
I'd have to have a look at the email, Mr. Latham. We are not. I'm unable to go into the specifics, but I can assure the committee that I have not misled the committee. I take my appearances here very seriously, as we all do, and I acknowledge that I may not have come back on that day. I may not have had the time to do it. Or I may not have been called to do it. It may have slipped my mind.
Chair, I
think I've answered the question to the best of my ability.
Why would you consider this not to be a contempt of the Parliament?
Chair, I might just suggest
Secretary, why would you consider this not to be
okay, Chair, I'll take a point of order.
Parliament?
I think for procedural fairness, given that there's been an indication from both the person you're questioning and the Secretary that fairness, and Mr. Withy, that fairness would dictate that both respondents have the opportunity to avail themselves of the email. I'm sure that they will have an opportunity during the break, which is coming up shortly, to seek the email out and reevaluate it and come back to you with some more answers after the break. I think
okay, it was sent on Wednesday, the 23rd of February 2022 at 5:49 p.m. to Mr. Withy and to Ms. Cashier.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the consideration.
Okay, can I come to a
Ask if
separate... Sorry.
given that, if the witnesses could produce, they've obviously got access to this information, if they could produce that so that we have that information available for the next session.
Can I please confirm the specific data that you're after so we can make sure that we are identifying the right one? Just in the...
Well, it's the same thing I've asked 5 times and being told that it was easily available, but it's never produced. And that is the number of casual staff, unattested, active in the system, who have been flagged that they're not allowed to set foot on a school. And the number is 9,000, which clearly would help a lot, massively, with the staff shortages we have all over New South Wales. And could I further ask, among the 9,000, can we get an accurate number? I'm assuming most of them are casual teachers, but are there any among the 9,000 who are non-teaching support staff? That's a question. That's a question too.
Okay, we will take that away and see what figures we can come back within the time frame of the hearing, and if not, we'll take those specific figures on notice.
Okay, can I ask what's the status of the Section 83C review of the Catholic Education Office Diocese of Parramatta, where school funds have been used to purchase 2 parish properties with no apparent educational use, and the very clear suggestion that these properties have been purchased by Mr Whitby, head of the diocese, to bail out a parish priest, a friend of his, who has got into financial trouble in the management of the parish. What is the status of the investigation? And given the clear inference that this may well involve fraud, the misuse of public funds in the manner I've described, have the police been notified?
And so, Chair, obviously with matters currently under investigation and of interest to the committee, I will make sure that we provide information that we can back to you on that issue. I don't have any details of that that current investigation with me today, but I'm very happy to take that on notice and come back to you.
Under Section 83C reviews, is it the practice of the department, if there's a clear fraud, to notify the police?
Where there is reason to notify the police of potential criminal activity, we would absolutely notify the police of that in our standard procedures.
Okay, and is anyone able to tell me the stage that the investigation is up to?
And so I am happy to, in the break, contact my colleague who leads this panel. You will appreciate that it is not something that I would delve into day to day or try and influence the decisions of. It sits as an independent panel that runs these investigations, which would be appropriate that it does so. And so I am happy to check in on the timing of that.
Just to clarify and repeat that my understanding is that the school funds were used to buy 2 church parish properties that have no education use whatsoever, and it's part of a bailout of a parish priest. So the allegations are very serious, and if we can get an update on how they're being handled, that would be appreciated. My time has expired. We're near enough to the morning tea break, so we'll take 15 minutes adjournment. Thank you. turn to the Labor opposition for their questioning. Mr D'Adam, please.
Mr Chair. Ms Catcher, I want to draw your attention to question 185 in the supplementary answers to supplementary questions. You were asked, or the department was asked, what is the teacher rate of absence due to COVID in 2022? And your answer is, it's not possible to determine COVID-related sick leave. It's, given the evidence that's been provided earlier today around work health and safety notifications, how is it possible that you don't know how many teachers have called in with COVID?
I haven't got the answer in front of me, but I will endeavour to answer the question. Mr D'Adam, teachers who have COVID and indeed all staff are required to notify the department that is what they have. Sometimes a casual teacher will have COVID and may not, may choose to just be at home, or they may be at home with parental duties. Somebody in the family may have COVID, so they may be looking for that, looking after those people at home. Would you mind, because I don't have it in front of me, would you mind reading the specific question that was asked?
The question is, what is the teacher rate of absence due to COVID in 2022?
And so, Mr D'Adam, if I may, where I think we can help the committee with that question is that we can provide details of the number of staff who are absent because they have COVID. What we can't do is provide any details of that in relation to casual staff, as Ms Catcher replied, because they may not have they don't have quite the same requirement to report to us if they have COVID and haven't been on a school site. And also, we do not capture fully the data in relation to those that might be in isolation because they are a household contact. So we would know that they are off for a week locally, but we wouldn't necessarily know. So I'm very happy to come back to you with the specifics we can provide.
If you had the data available, why wasn't it returned in the answer to the question?
Well, in the answer to the question you asked, if I heard you correctly, Mr D'Adam, is how many are off because of COVID. In relation to that, as I just described, we are unable to determine the total number of staff who are absent because they are either have COVID or are a household contact. What I've just indicated to you is I'm very happy to come back on notice with the specifics of those staff who have suffered from COVID and have reported that to us.
Okay, so in the answer that was returned, you also indicate, you say that staff also have the option to apply for special leave if they are ill from COVID or required to comply with isolation protocols. Is that correct?
They do, but that is correct, but they are not required to, Mr D'Adam. They may, but they do not have to, and not all of our staff would have done so.
Well, why not?
Well, Mr D'Adam, I would be an example myself. Last week I was in isolation because my daughter had COVID. I have not claimed special leave as a requirement for that. I continued to work from home in my duties, and there will be some staff who will be unable to do that also. So they may or may not access that special leave provision. I'm very happy to provide you on notice the numbers of staff who have accessed that special provision alongside those that have also had COVID, if that would assist the committee.
So are you advising staff who've accessed sick leave that they could have accessed special leave?
All of our staff have access to the leave entitlements in relation to COVID matters. It is published on our website, and we regularly update our school leaders through a often daily email, depending on the nature of the events, called a sit rep that goes out to all school leaders to inform staff as well.
So I want to clarify: special leave is available if you are sick with COVID yourself, or if you are required to isolate because a household contact.
Correct.
That's correct?
Yes.
And that's been communicated to all staff?
Yes, it has.
And
When? Sorry.
Yeah, so when was that communicated to staff?
I can come back to the specifics on that, Mr D'Adam, but it would have been quite early on in the pandemic and then repeated in various updates as we have experienced COVID through the system. So we've been very transparent with our staff on their entitlements. Our intranet page has all of that information available to staff. We regularly flag to staff the need to go back to that web page and stay updated with events. And so is one of our most one of our most viewed intranet pages, as you can imagine. And so, as I indicated, in terms of assisting the committee, very happy to provide you with the numbers of staff who have suffered from COVID and to provide you with the data we have on those that have accessed the special leave provisions in relation to COVID.
So, Mr D'Adam, could I just supplement what the Secretary has said there in relation to the question and answer that you have in front of you? And as we said, we'll go and dig further into the data and come back to you on notice. But I think as a system, in terms of sick leave, the system incorporates all type of sick leave, and that may be where the nuance in the question has been difficult to tease out. So it includes also non-COVID related sick leave as well. But as the Secretary said, we will endeavour to do a breakdown. It'll probably have to be site by site, to be honest, in terms of those numbers coming through for specific COVID-related issues, and that's probably why that response has been more global in nature.
So will you undertake to advise staff who've accessed sick leave instead of special leave that they could have that leave recredited and the leave adjusted to special leave?
I'm very happy to update that, provide that assurance to our staff in the next update that we put out to all staff, yes.
So I want you to categorically confirm this, that if you are sick yourself, you can access special leave.
Yes.
Right, well, I'm advised that's not the instruction that's being provided to staff in schools.
In which case...
Star, perhaps you might be able to, or Miss Nixon?
My recollection is that on numerous occasions, including principal live streams that have been almost weekly across the last 2 years, including sit reps, which are situation reports emailed to principals almost daily across the last 2 years, we can certainly go back. There is a multiplicity of occasions where we have relayed to our workforce what are the leave arrangements under COVID.
Mr D'Adam, Ms Catcher can provide you with the detail on the specifics of what leave you can access for what purposes.
So in terms of casuals, which I understand your question related to...
Not related to casuals.
Well, we provide up to 20 days special leave, which is in addition to, people's regular sick leave. As Mr Disdar said, we make it we're very transparent about it. There are multiple points at which we inform our staff, including on our staff intranet, of the types of leave that they can access.
Can I just clarify
sick.
so that we're talking about the same thing? You
Yes.
indicated that the question related to casuals. It didn't relate to casuals. It's relating to
COVID.
teaching staff.
Yes.
Right, whether they're permanent, temporary or casual. And you can confirm on the record that those staff in those categories all have access to special leave in the event that they are individually sick with COVID.
And so, Mr D'Adam, I'm just conscious I don't have it up in front of me. I will endeavour to get it during the hearing. There has been, obviously, consistency sought throughout the public service, and I want to make sure that we give you entirely the right information here. There is certainly a special leave available should it be required by staff if they are unable to access sick leave, but I do just want to check that...
I can break down the cohort. So, sorry, Mr D'Adam, I did assume that your question wasn't just about COVID, that it related to casuals as well. So I'll step through them. So for casuals, we've extended COVID special leave to a maximum of 20 days for casual staff. And you'll appreciate that that's because when you're a casual teacher, that's all inbuilt into your daily rate of pay. In terms of other staff, there's 20 days... as I said, there's 20 days maximum special leave. If you're sick, you do take your own sick leave and not that additional special leave. We've granted special leave on occasion to allow people to have time to go and get vaccinated or to care for somebody at home who has COVID at the time.
Okay, so now we get back to the actual facts, which is it's not correct to say that they've got access to special leave for permanent and temporary staff if in the event that they're individually sick with COVID. That is
correct. That is
okay.
my understanding.
Thank you. So...
you're sick with COVID, you take sick leave, Mr D'Adam.
So, well, actually, if you're sick with COVID, there's a presumption that you've gotten it at work and you should actually be accessing workers' compensation, but we'll get to that. So, if someone's taking sick leave, you're recording the reason for their sick leave, aren't you?
Yes, so as I indicated, we are aware, and I'm very happy to provide to your notice the number of staff who have been off work because of COVID. So yes, we
Okay,
specifically
so
require that reason to be
you are able to
stated.
provide the data around how many teachers have been absent because of COVID.
So because
you're
of
collecting
COVID,
it for on the basis of people accessing special leave and those who are accessing sick leave on the grounds of COVID.
Mr. Diadam, I can provide you with those two specific data points, the number of people that have taken sick leave and declared to us that it was COVID, and we have asked and required, our staff are required to do that in the public health order if they have COVID. I can provide you also with the number of people who have taken special leave. I will need to also in that answer be clear whether or not we can break out those that are taking special leave because they are in isolation due to COVID, household contact having COVID, or whether they are taking special leave for another reason, which may be granted locally. I'll just need to check whether or not we can disaggregate those numbers. If not, I am happy to provide you with the total number of staff that have taken special leave during any particular period that you are interested in. I think you said 2022 for this answer. And just put that proviso on it, whether or not we were able to disaggregate those that were on special leave because of COVID.
I can provide some information, which I hope will be of assistance, Mr. Diadam, in relation to that. So obviously, as I said, for casuals, the pay rate includes, it's a daily rate, it's an all-in rate, so a casual doesn't get sick leave like a permanent staff member would. Where casual staff will be granted COVID-19 special leave where they've got a confirmed casual booking and they need to isolate due to having been exposed to COVID, and as you rightly said, there's a presumption that you picked it up at the site, and because they're a household or close contact with a confirmed COVID-19 case, or where they confirm that they're caring for somebody with COVID. I hope that's of assistance.
Yes, thank you. So you've just advised the committee that it is possible to determine that where someone's absent on sick leave on the basis of COVID. So my question then is, why in the response to question 51 of questions taken on notice at the last hearing did you say it's not possible to determine COVID-related sick leave?
Because it's the question, as I recall you reading it to us, Mr. Diadam, was not whether or not people were absent due to sick leave for COVID, but because of COVID, and that categorisation of because of COVID we are not able to provide the specifics on due to the nature of household contacts and whether or not people access leave for that purpose. As I have indicated to you, I am very happy to provide you with the data on the number of staff that have been absent because they have had COVID this year. I am also happy to provide you with the data of those people that have taken special leave during this period, and if possible to disaggregate within that total number the number that took special leave for COVID-related purposes.
I mean, it's clear from the text that the statement is flatly wrong based on the...
I don't concur, Mr. Diadam. We answered the question that was asked.
So, Ms. Catchia, why is it that, given the presumption, given that you know how many people have accessed sick leave, why is it that only 8 people have accessed workers' comp?
I think it's to do, Mr. Diadam, with the way in which workers' compensation works. So there's obviously different regimes depending on the nature of the condition that you have. So we offer, as I said, special leave for casuals, even though technically we're not technically required to do that. For permanent and temporary staff, they have access to sick leave. You're quite right in saying that if you contract COVID during the course of your employment, during an engagement, you are presumed as a standard presumption under our New South Wales legislation that you contracted that at work. On the last occasion, I think we talked about the process for people to notify health and safety that they've got an ongoing issue in accordance with COVID. So what would ordinarily happen is that if you contract COVID and you're working, you would advise your school principal that you have COVID, that you need to take a period of time off. You take that as sick leave. If you have an ongoing issue, or indeed from the first period in which you have COVID, you can also concurrently make an application.
Can I just butt you up there? Because
Sure.
The presumption is that if you've got it from, you've gotten it because of work. So irrespective of your actual condition, if you're absent from work because of COVID, whether you're isolating and reasonably well or not very well, is irrelevant. Right?
Chair, I'm going to
So-
bail.
no, no,
I'm going to bail Mr. Adam up there because Ms. Kutcher was answering the question, and given that she wasn't able to complete the answer, she may well have broached some of the issues that Mr. Diadam's about to touch on.
No, she wasn't going to. and
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Diadam, you can't preempt what Ms. Kutcher was going to say.
I note the point of order, but let's allow the question and the answers to proceed.
Well, I might move on. Given that there's only 8 teachers who've sought workers' compensation, doesn't that suggest that something is dramatically wrong with the advice that you are providing to staff?
No, it
The
doesn't.
presumption that they're on workers' comp, there should be no reason why every staff member who's contracted COVID, who hasn't been at work, is not lodging a workers' compensation claim. Are you actively discouraging people from lodging
No.
workers'
Mr. Diadam,
compensation?
by no means would we be actively discouraging people from lodging a workers' compensation claim. It is the individual's responsibility to lodge that claim. We have made clear to our staff on all of our guidance on our intranet that that option is available to them. We do not have an automatic process that does that for our staff, but we do have the information out there for our staff to support them in making that claim if they wish to do so.
And we have staff members in work health and safety who can assist people to make an application for workers' compensation. There is, as the Secretary said, there is absolutely no reason why somebody wouldn't lodge a workers' compensation claim unless they did not think it's appropriate. So I don't think the number 8 bears any relevance to whether or not the system is working. I think the system is working.
There are
People
clearly
will take-
thousands of teachers, Ms. Kutcher, who are
taking-
off on
Point of order
because
again,
of
Chair.
COVID. How is it possible?
Mr. Diadam
How
was
is it
interrupted.
possible that only 8 people have sought to lodge a workers' compensation claim?
Chair, point of
answer-
order. Mr. Diadam again interrupted Ms. Kutcher while she was in the middle of her answer.
The answer to that, thank you. The answer to that, Mr. Diadam, is likely to be that ordinarily somebody will contract COVID, they will take a period of sick leave, and then if they are okay to come back to work, the sick leave expires. If I just can come back to the whole purpose and regime under which the workers' compensation process works, workers' compensation is designed to support an employee through a period of ongoing medical need. It's designed to work with an employee to make sure that we are supporting them in order to be able to return safely to work. It's designed to support them in the payment of long-term unemployment should they be unable to come back to work. So, for example, if you contracted COVID, and you're right, there's a presumption that you would get that in the workplace, you may get what's called long COVID. You may have some sort of ongoing respiratory problem. I'm not sure the nature of them. There could be a number of different things. I'm not a healthcare professional. But should this go from a sick leave issue where you contract COVID, come back to work after a period of sick leave, then if you have an ongoing issue in relation to your symptoms and lingering symptoms that are causing you injury and
Actually,
illness from
I don't need
COVID, you would make a workers'
have the workers'
compensation
compensation
claim.
system explained to me.
Okay.
Can I ask you, the department maintains an arrangement for top-up pay in workers' compensation. Isn't that correct?
I believe so. Again, I'll have to take specifics on notice if the question
That's a
is...
situation where if you're on workers' compensation, your pay is topped up to your normal weekly pay from your sick leave. Is that a fair summary of how the system works?
The system works, Mr. Diadam, so that you are not generally out of pocket, i.e. you would be paid at the rate that you were ordinarily paid, yes.
So there's no financial disincentive for people to access the workers' compensation system in preference to sick leave. I mean, if they access sick leave, that's coming out of their own entitlements. If they access workers' comp, then that's obviously a cost that's fully met by the department.
As
Is
is
that correct?
sick leave. That's right.
So, Ms. Kutcher, can I ask you, does your employment terms provide for a KPI around reducing the workers' compensation liability of the department?
No. What we are focused on in health and safety, and indeed as a department, is, like any organisation, making sure that we support our staff through their workers' compensation period, any period that they are off work, to ensure that they are returning to work in a safe way. It, as I said, involves making sure that they're getting appropriate medical treatment, that they're appropriately positioned to return to work if and when they are able. What we are very focused on is something that's really important across all workers' compensation regimes in all organisations, and that is making sure that we case manage those cases very carefully by keeping in regular contact with people who are off work as a consequence of workers' compensation, to make sure that they are getting what they need from us, but to make sure that we are liaising with them as the employer, because they'll often be going to medical appointments or dealing with our insurer, etc. So it's a process whereby we make sure that they've got that adequate support, not just with the insurer but with the employer as well.
Okay, thank you. Could I just come back to the question about the Parramatta diocese, the Catholic Education Office, and the for-profit activities of Mr Whitby, the Executive Director. On the 24th of January, Carolyn Walsh, the Chair of the Non-Government Schools Not-for-Profit Advisory Committee, wrote to Mr Whitby saying the committee had agreed to recommend to the Minister that she declares St Madeleine's Catholic Primary School, which purchased these two properties with no education use, to be operating for-profit pursuant to Section 83D1 of the Act. Has the Minister accepted that recommendation and made the appropriate for-profit declaration?
I will need to take the specifics of that one on notice, Mr Chair. I have attempted to contact colleagues who would be closer to this information than I, and I was unable to do so in the break, but I'm very happy to come back to you on notice with the specifics of that.
Well, it's 2.5 months ago. How long does it normally take for the Minister to accept a recommendation from this Walsh committee?
And so, in part, it will depend how long and how complicated the matters are in terms of preparing the briefing as well. So if I could take that on notice, because I want to make sure that I don't do anything that impacts on that investigation in my answers, Chair. So I will come back to you on notice if I may.
Is that possible before the end of this hearing, or that'll happen subsequently?
It will happen subsequently, Chair.
Okay. It just looks like a very, very serious matter.
It does, Chair, and that's why I really want to make sure we don't disrupt the investigative process by me making comments today that could influence that.
That needs urgent attention. And Ms Cashier, your email sent to you by Mr Chung on the 23rd of February, you've had a chance to have a look at it. Please tell me that the 9,000 staff who were sent the letter, that should have been notified to this committee, shouldn't it?
Chair, I do have a copy of the email that was sent to me in the break, and I've read it, and I see here it says, letter to be sent to approximately 9,000 staff on Thursday the 24th of February, and then, SITREP communications for principals, etc. And then it goes on to say, note, it is very likely many of the staff who are not currently working in schools do not access their DOE email address, so this would include from that a presumption that they include inactive staff. But, Chair, I do think, given that I don't have all of the material that preceded this email, that it would be appropriate to take that on notice. I think it's really important that we're very specific about the questions so that I can give you exactly what you require, because as we've said today already this morning, these groups of people that we're writing to can often include permanents, temporaries and casuals, and so I'd like to give the committee exactly what you require, and I'd like to have...
I got the temporary number, but I've never got the casual.
I'd like to have an opportunity, as I said, the number moves, and we don't, as I said, the casuals will often be in the inactive cohort and then move to active while they take on a role in a school on a particular day. So it would be useful to have a look at all of the information that preceded this. It appears to be an approval email, a chain of approval emails following what we would have had as a meeting, a group meeting to discuss the process and procedures to follow for unattested staff. So absolutely happy and keen to get the committee exactly what you need.
Yeah, can we get a copy of the executive paper that's mentioned in the first line after the message from Paul Wood? And just to again draw your attention to the fact, point number one, of this action is notifying active staff of the requirement to attest.
And so, Chair, if I may, I'll take advice on whether we can provide that paper to you, and if we are able to, I will. Can I just confirm, I think one of the areas we might be able to assist here is to give you the number of non-compliant casual staff who have had their approval to teach temporarily withheld. That would indicate that they were both active in our system and non-compliant, and if so, if that number would be of use to the committee, I'm very happy to provide that on notice to you.
Okay. And how many other letters of this kind have been sent out obviously with the text message to tell them to go check their email address? Because the Minister on the 22nd of February said that 1,000 casual and temporary staff had received correspondence. We find out today that approximately 9,000 staff unattested received the red flag on the 24th of February. Since the 24th of February, how many other of these processes have been undertaken?
So we'll come back to you with the specifics of that on notice, Chair. If I may, that 9,000 staff figure that you're quoted does not necessarily refer to casual teachers. As Ms Katchia indicated, it will likely include corporate staff as well as temporary teachers and others. So I just want to make sure we are clear on the number. I think in the email, as I discussed it with Ms Katchia in the break, it refers to staff rather than specifically casual staff.
Well, isn't ECPC electronic casual payroll claims?
And so, again, I just want to make sure that we confirm the nature of that on notice, if we may.
Okay. And Mr Withy, just to come back to you, you've had a chance to look at it. You said ditto. You didn't think to pipe up on the 2nd of March here at estimates to say the number's 9,000?
So as I said in my previous answer, Chair, my recollection, having checked that email in the break, was that it was part of broader efforts to make sure we were encouraging people to attest where it was necessary.
Yeah, 9,000.
I remember that detail. I did not recall, and I did not recall when you asked this morning.
Yeah. Have you dittoed any other of these processes? Bulk letters that go out to staff saying they can't set foot in a school?
So we have made a number of efforts to encourage our staff to attest. As the Secretary said, we will have to take the
That's not the
detail
question. The question, have you got any recollection of other things you've dittoed, bulk correspondence that goes out to thousands of staff saying you're not allowed, you've been red flagged, you're not allowed to set foot in a school?
So I do recall that we have made a number of efforts to contact our workforce in its totality to encourage them to attest. We would have to take the details of the timing of that on notice.
You're taking that on
And so,
notice
Chair, if I can just confirm, I don't think it would be appropriate to assume that the 9,000 are a number of staff that. I think it's careful. We need to be careful in drawing conclusions from the number of 9,000. As I indicated, I'm very happy to come back to the committee on notice with the number of non-compliant casual staff who have had their approval to teach temporarily suspended, which would be the best measure we have of those that have not attested from our casual pool.
Yeah, and as Secretary, can I ask Ms Harrison, can you see the breakdown here where it takes a Member of Parliament to have access to these documents before the committee is provided with any kind of accurate answer? I tried 5 times to get this number, 5 times, and every time I was referred, like on a merry-go-round, to non-answers.
And so, Chair, I note that the questions you're referring to are all slightly different in their nature. I'm very happy to take on notice, as I've indicated.
Can't rely on that, Mr Harrison, though. You can't rely
Point of
on
order,
that.
Chair. Point of order.
No, I welcome Mr Dowdham. Can you?
I'm sure you do.
I've got a question.
Yeah. You can ask the question. You can ask the question when Ms Harrison has
Okay, well,
finished
let
her
Ms
answer.
Harrison finish, then I'll cede my time to Mr Dowdham.
If I may, the questions you referred, having read through them in the break, varied from how many casual and temporary teachers were advised by the department due to vaccination status they were no longer eligible to teach in New South Wales Government schools, through to how many casual teachers were teaching in New South Wales Government schools. Those questions are quite different, Chair, and so that is why, Mr Dowdham, in relation to your question, we can only answer the questions we have been asked, and we do so as openly as we are able
At
to.
estimates on the 2nd of March, I clearly asked, we had a discussion about how many letters had gone out. I said, how many letters have gone out? And Ms Cashier said, Chair, certainly we'll get you that data. I can take that, I'll look through my notes, I can give it to you today, and I can access that very quickly. So this was 6 days earlier. This email exchange is 6 days earlier, and the answer clearly is 9,000.
And so, Chair, we would obviously want to make sure we write to our staff on a number of different issues. Ms Catcher will have wanted to go and check that they are aligned to the issues that you were raising in the hearing, and I don't have those previous questions in front of me.
Secretary, that's not going to wash. Clearly, a witness here under oath has an obligation to say, well, actually 6 days ago we sent out 9,000 of those letters that you're asking about. Isn't it as just straightforward as the constant attempts of this department to withhold information for some cover you're running, maybe for the minister, maybe to avoid controversy, but it is a debasement of the process of this committee.
Chair, I would ask, and it's obviously a difficult situation given you are the chair, but I'm not sure that question would be in order.
Why not? It's factual. Anyway, I'll go to Mr Diadam.
Chair, if I may,
just
before...
wanted to raise the point.
Point of order. I think Ms Harrison wants
Harrison.
to respond to what
Okay,
was
Ms
put by the
Harrison.
Chair.
I think, Chair, some questions have been raised. I think they have been answered openly, and honestly, I think some of the challenges you have raised there are unfair and unjust. I think the witnesses have been clear that they come here to answer the questions honestly. They do so within the best of their recollection, the best of the information they have available, and that is all that, I think that is what we have come to do, and that is what we will continue to do. There is no sense on the side of the department that we are seeking to cover anything up. We are very happy to answer the questions we are asked.
Yeah, but when we ask a question, Ms Cashier will produce data to say always that the vaccination rate is 98, 99%. But these 9,000 letters clearly show that was never the case. I raised that 7,000 teachers had been sacked or stood down, and you would jump in to say that's not the figure. Well, the 9,000 indicates it was the figure.
I don't concur with that analysis, Chair.
Mr Diadam.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, there are many examples throughout the responses where the department has felt the need to provide supplementary information in an effort to try and elaborate on an answer to a question that aren't necessarily a precise response to the exact question. How can you possibly say that just because the specific, the specific terms of the questions were slightly different, that you weren't in a position to provide sufficient elaboration to actually meet the expectations of Mr Latham and his question?
So, Mr Diadam, I think in my answers today where we've been able to clarify what it is you are seeking, I have been very clear that I'm happy to provide you with the information.
Ms Harrison, have any of the staff, to your knowledge, been told by executive directors to delete anything, emails, documents, drafts, etc., that may be controversial in an attempt to deny access to FOI and also Standing Order 52 applications?
And so, Chair, I am aware that within the department we regularly refresh our training and engagement of staff in relation to the State Records Act and what is appropriate records to keep. Beyond that, certainly I would not endorse any communication beyond the requirements of the State Records Act that we take anything away for any other purpose.
Are you aware of a report in the Daily Telegraph that a school principal, I'm assuming this was in the Illawarra, was told by departmental officials not to provide to the media or to document any accurate numbers about staff shortages in case it causes controversy for the minister?
I'm aware of the media reports. I am not aware of the email specifically from within our own system.
Okay. Did you investigate if it's true?
I had a conversation with Mr Disdar and he might be able to provide you with some further information.
The Disdar.
I have had a conversation with the Secretary. I'm aware of the media reports as well, but I don't know who they refer to, and that's what I relayed to Ms Harrison, that I'm not sure who the senior officer is that's referred to.
Okay. Can I move to Walgett High and Mr Disdar with these connected community processes, the very disturbing information that's now coming out, particularly in that Sydney Morning Herald report, how the highest funded per capita school in the state is a den of violence, absenteeism, failing results. What is the department going to do to turn around this catastrophe? Upon which parents are reported as saying we'll travel an hour or so to get away from Walgett Community College to get to other schools, and I think Lightning Ridge was mentioned.
Thanks for the question, Chair. I met with the school reference group myself on Friday across Teams to hear from them around their perceptions of how we were travelling I'm assuming we're referring to the high school because there's a primary school there and a high school. They covered territory in relation to both schools with me. I can say to the committee that we've got a long way to go to get the required improvements that we're after as a system for Walgett Community College High School, but we are seeing some traction in some areas. We've had a new leadership team there for 11 months. Mr. Batchelor is the executive principal there. I've met with him on numerous occasions so that I can, through my role across Connected Communities, support him. There has been a focus. If the committee wants these areas where we think we're improving on outlined, I'm happy to do so. There's been a focus certainly on Year 7 and 8 attendance. It was a real concern, the drop-off rate from primary school to high school with attendance. And as the committee would appreciate, if we can't make those improvements early in secondary education, it's going to be even tougher along the way. We have engaged a lot closer with the TAFE, and I was able to meet with the TAFE coordinator on Friday to both engage students, Chair, that have not been attending for anywhere between 6 to 12 months, so they've become school refusers, completely disengaged. We're able to talk to the programs and initiatives that are available for them, as well as a real pathways focus for each individual student in the high school. There are some improvements in that area. We have employed a former TAFE Institute director to work hand in hand with the leadership to support them around the Pathways initiative. Chair, there are significant improvements that are required around the literacy and numeracy results of the students. We don't shy away from that. We have also made some improvements around staffing stability at the school. You'll remember there was a line of questioning at former estimates hearing around vacancy rates at Walgett. We have had greater staff stability across these 11 months, which is also helping at the site. I would also call out, as you would have read, Chair, in the committee, that this is a whole of government response that's required and that is being provisioned around what is a very challenging and complex community that the school also services.
Isn't the truth that Anne Dennis of the AECG is calling the shot? She wants an all-Aboriginal school, zero police presence, and basically is trying to implement a Black Lives Matter philosophy to school education in Walgett. It's said, Mr Dizdar, that you refuse to tell her how wrong that is, so too Michelle Hall, and as a product the school has melted down because of this, the wrongfulness of this philosophy?
Well, I don't accept that premise at all, Chair. Anne Dennis is the local AECG president. She's also a member of the school reference group. As you would expect, it would be incumbent of myself and my executive director for Connected Communities to both engage with the AECG and the reference group, which we do. My engagement with her at all times has been solutions focused, certainly calling out the challenges from her angle, and certainly called out with a lot of passion and commitment for the children in the area. That's been my experience in working with them.
Do you take the view because she's Aboriginal you can never tell her she's wrong?
I take, again, I don't accept that premise.
How many times have you told her that she's wrong?
I don't...
She's ruining the school.
Well, allow me to answer your question. I don't accept the premise. She's a valued stakeholder as the president of the AECG, like I would engage with any president of the AECG in any locality. She's also a founding member and continuing member of the school reference group, so it would be incumbent on me to engage. We have quite rigorous debate, in my experience, when we debate the challenges of Walgett. And I'd also say, Chair, she speaks to me about challenges in other localities as well. So I find her to be a passionate contributor to education in the area. That doesn't mean I agree with everything she says, or nor does she agree with everything I say.
Why is it that the department failed to release to Mr Banasiak the numbers on the school safety notifications and the police call-out numbers for Walgett, and you had set of excuses about privacy. Why can't that be done on a confidential basis to give Mr Banasiak the answers that he needs on notice?
Chair, I think that line of questioning was covered earlier and applies here to Walgett. I'm more than happy to meet and provide in confidence that material. We protect, as we indicated in the answer we provided, the privacy of individuals. This is again, a challenging school context, and that can add to the challenge and complexity unnecessarily, but I'm happy to provide that on a confidential basis to Mr Banasiak and to reach out to him.
Okay, and Mr Disdar, are you aware of allegations by teachers at Walgett that the Executive Director, Connected Communities, Michelle Hall, engages in bullying and intimidation of Connected Communities executive principals, and this has included changing digital file names to create a false case against an executive principal at Walgett?
I've had no such claims put to me in my time as the Deputy Secretary for Connected Communities. I am across although I don't know what the substance of it is, a PES investigation with a executive principal. So if that's where you're reading that's coming from, all I know in my supervisory role is that there's a PES investigation, but I don't believe anything has been communicated to me around those claims.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr Chair, I'm going to come back to the issues at Jerromabombera High School, or the new Jerromabombera High School. Sorry, apologies. The first question I want to ask is, Mr Disdar, we talked about the current consultation process that's going on with the public now. When are you expecting to make a decision about the final zones?
So, Ms Hughes, my understanding is that on the Friday of week 2 of term 2, I can only think in school week terms, I don't have the date in front of me, but Friday week 2 of term 2, the consultation closes. We will then look carefully at all the representations that are made and look for any suggestions or improvements that are valid, and make those decisions as expediently as we can. I think I said in my earlier answer, we're looking at mid-term 2.
Mid-term 2, we're looking for...
I mean, as you'd appreciate, Ms Hughes, it'll depend on the nature of the representations, how many representations we get, but we know that we need to provide stability of understanding for those boundaries to those school communities, so we'll be working as hard as we can.
And is there an appeal process after that, or is that then the final decision?
Well, I mean, there's no appeal processes with boundaries. We can make, we communicate, like I said, on a small scale when there's one street change to when there's considerable community feedback that we're seeking here. There are appeal mechanisms under the enrolment policy. When you lodge an in-area or an out-of-area application, there's appeal mechanisms that exist there.
Okay. I might go back to Ms Harrison, because these are questions probably for Schools Infrastructure New South Wales that I know are not here today. The current projection, can you just tell me what the current projection is for the new Jerromabombera High School?
Sorry, Ms Hughes, because Mr Manning wasn't requested today. We assumed there wasn't going to be a focus necessarily on infrastructure, so I don't have that information with me, but very happy to take those details on notice, or for you to follow up with Mr Diadam through the inquiry hearings that you have coming up. Okay, so I'm just interested in knowing, then perhaps you could take that one on notice. Happy to.
I noticed in the answers to questions on notice that you provided to us, it says that, I don't have I can find the reference if you need it, but there'll be 9.5 full-time new teachers at the Jerromabombera High School next year. We can assume then that's for years 7 and 8 only, is that correct?
Mr Disdar might know the specifics on which years are commencing when.
Yes, I don't want to get it wrong, because there's Bungendore High School as well.
Yep, they've got a similar, I think it's 9.5 there as well.
No, the year groups that we're starting with,
Yep.
I believe it to be year 7 and 8.
Okay.
But if that's not correct, we'll come to you with the correct information.
Sure. Excellent.
I believe that to be the case.
Okay. Can you tell me then, I mean, my understanding is that that the initial stage of Jerromabombera High School is going to be built for 500 students. Can you just tell me, and I'm happy for you to take this on notice, if there is a second phase of Jerromabombera High School planned?
Very happy to take that on notice, Ms Houzos.
Thanks. And if you've commenced planning that stage?
Yep.
And what the capacity for that second stage would be?
Yep, very happy to provide those details on notice.
So my understanding is that the initial planning documents that have been submitted to the council are actually for 500 students. So that's the...
Yep, so very happy to take those specifics of any second phase, the capacity of a second phase, and whether we're in the planning stages or not.
I can just add to the Secretary's answer that I'm across the fact that the core facilities are bigger than what's required for the initial establishment. And core facilities are, as you'd know,
The
Ms.
hall, the
Houzos.
admin buildings, is that
Yes,
correct?
so that if there's a required expansion of school size, that we've already inbuilt and factored that in, and it's already built for that.
Perhaps Mr Disdar or Ms Harrison, you can tell us what is the capacity of those core buildings? Sure. My understanding is it's 800 to 900 students.
Very
we
happy
can
to.
get the exact number.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just move on to a different issue now, which is unflued gas heaters. Again, it's schools infrastructure. I understand they're not here. They did provide a really helpful list of all of the schools.
Yep.
If you could just provide us with a list of the number of classrooms that have at each of those schools, that would be great. Now, I wanted to come to the question of the metro and regional renewal projects. Now, this is something that we have asked a lot of questions about, but the government is refusing to release the list of the projects and the percentage contribution of the P&Cs to each project. Ms Harrison, what's the reason for that?
I am not aware of those issues, Ms Houzos, so I will need to take that on notice.
Okay, but can I just, it is in the public interest that they are aware of what projects have been funded under a particular program and which projects haven't been, and that's previously under for example, the Cooler Classrooms program. That's something that springs to mind that we've asked a lot of questions about. The department has released a list of projects. We've asked a lot of questions on this in estimates. I've asked questions on notice. We've asked questions, I've lodged questions at other times about this. Can you just explain what is the rationale for this particular project, and is this a new policy going forward?
So there is no new policy, and I am very happy to take on notice and come back to you with any specific issues. What I know about this programme is that it's also currently underway, so a lot of matters will be out to tender, and it may well be in relation to the commercial in confidence nature of those local tender processes. I will endeavour to give you whatever we can that has completed, and then we can always update that information later if possible. So I'm very happy to take on notice what has occurred, what the reasoning is, and provide you with clarity on that.
So, I understand you just said you'll take them on note. You'll provide a list of completed projects.
I will seek to do
explain-
so once I understand the specifics of what has occurred so far.
Can you just explain? I understand that you wouldn't want to disclose the amount that had been budgeted for each particular project, but can you explain why, if something is out for tender, can you explain why you couldn't tell the community that there is a project that's planned that's out for tender?
And so I'm very happy to come. I'm conscious of commenting on things that I do not have the detail in front of me, Ms Houzos, so I am very happy to take that on notice. There would be we would expect there to be awareness at a school of the local matters that were likely to be taken into account. I would expect that to be done as part of the consultation process on those works, particularly if they're using P&C funds. The community is likely to be aware that there are plans to use those funds. So I don't think there is a sense that we're holding things back from a local school community in that context.
Okay, but can I just say before we go down the pathway of calls for papers and things like that, can we just save ourselves some trouble and just to get a list of projects, even if therefore the percentage contribution of P&Cs needs to be privileged? That particular part of it I accept, but I can't see a justification for a list of projects not being released.
Very happy to come back to you with whatever we're able to provide with any explanation as to why we can't provide any further information, Ms.
Okay,
Houzos.
and then can I add the roof renewal program to that as well, because that's a similar
You can,
requirement?
absolutely.
Thanks very much. Now, I want to come back to that question. Oh, sorry, it was question 60 that was listing the teaching entitlements for new schools opening in 2023. It did list, it helpfully listed Jerromabombera High School, Bungendore High School. There was some other schools that were on that list. Gregory Hills Public School, the Tallawong Primary School and Marsden Park High School are not on the list. Does that mean that you are not anticipating hiring any new staff for those schools?
I might need to ask one of my operational colleagues to comment on the specifics of those schools, but we may need to take those on notice.
I won't have the specifics of each of those schools, but normally we hire the school principal with about a year out from the school opening, so we can include them in the final build to get, there's an enormous amount of work with recruitment of the staff that we will need, with setting up the school P&C, etc., etc. There's a lot of work, so normally we'll have the school principal on board. I can confirm, I've just had that confirmed, that it is Year 7 and 8 for Jerromabombera and Bungendore, and hence why you'd be quoting those figures, because we'd start with the principal and then staff for those year groups. So for those particular schools that you just referenced, it'll depend on who we start with and the size of staff we'd need for that.
Then perhaps, Mr Disdar, you could take on notice the list of schools for who you are planning to recruit principals in the next 12 months, if that's
Very happy to provide that on notice.
When I say the next 12 months, in 2022,
Yep.
the
This
list
calendar year.
of principals. Yeah,
Yep.
that would
No,
be
just
great.
also, Ms Usos, just while I said Year 7 and 8 that we've confirmed, I've had it confirmed that we will finalise the boundaries mid-term 2 for Queanbeyan that we've been discussing.
Great.
But can I just make sure I come back to you with the correct date for the closing of the consultation? I may have given the incorrect date for the committee, so let me come back. on that.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Can I just... So there was that list at question 60 with these are all the new teachers that we're planning on recruiting. That's the extent of the new recruitment that you're planning on doing. I understand that there's vacancies to be filled, and then you've got the new teachers that you're recruiting for the new schools. They're the only new positions that you'll be recruiting for. That's
So there will also be the second tranche of assistant principals curriculum instruction will be recruited through this year, and there will, may well be additional positions that schools establish using their RAM funding, which may also go out to recruitment this year as new positions.
okay.
And there may well be other programs in terms of the behaviour support specialists and things. There will be other new roles in the system that are created to support priorities in the system.
Would you be able to, on notice, provide me with a list of those programs and how many positions are expected in each program?
Specifically the school-based positions, Ms Husos?
Yes, please.
No problem.
That would be great. The next issue I wanted to go to was land sales. Again, this is from the questions that were taken on notice. I understand that, again, if there are things under tender, I think, Mr Withy, this was a question to you. If there are currently land sites that are up for sale, that's fine. Are you able to, on notice, provide us with a list of the land sales under $1 million that have already been sold? And also, actually, let me not add that disclaimer. Are you able to provide a list of the land sales, including those under $1 million, that have already been sold?
So I think that is probably a question for Mr Manning rather than me, but very happy to take away what we can provide on notice on that list.
And Ms Husos, if I may, just to give you some context, we currently hold around 300 hectares of vacant land as the Department of Education. Some of those sites are being held to fulfil future educational needs, but others are being disposed of as surplus to requirements. Community consultation occurs during the divestment process for sites that are determined to be particularly sensitive in the kind of divestment, and that feedback informs the future plans for the site. You'll appreciate in a community, if there's been vacant land, there will be interest in it. When we dispose of our land, the proceeds are reinvested in the provision of education infrastructure. And I think the amount received in 2020-2021 was $2.8 million in gross proceeds.
Sorry, 2.1.
2.8 million.
2.8 million. I said 2.1, but I wrote down 2.8. 2.8 million in gross proceeds. Okay. There was, sorry, that's that one. Just wanted to go, sorry, so I just have one more question, which was, I asked some questions about the announcement of the Google. Actually, it was the announcement of the new principal at Googong Public School. That was on Friday, the 28th of January, that the minister attended. Ms. Harrison, are you aware if anyone from the department spoke to the then Nationals candidate, Nicole Overall, prior to the announcement?
I am not aware of any conversations occurring, but I'm happy to check with my team on return after this hearing and come back to you on notice.
That would be great. And if you could just also then provide the date that the brief was requested for the event as well.
Certainly, if a brief was requested, I will provide that. I'll need to confirm.
That would
and come
be
back to you on
excellent.
notice.
Or if it wasn't requested, then what was the date that the brief was provided on?
Yep. Sure.
Great. Thanks very much. I'll hand to my colleague.
Thank you. Look, I'm concerned by the number around the 8 workers' comp claims around COVID, primarily because I fear that it's indicative of a culture in the department that is discouraging the making of workers' comp claims. And we heard earlier in evidence, Ms. Caccia seemed to suggest that workers' comp should only be used for where there's an expectation that the injury will have sort of long-term absences and long recovery. And so I wanted to, ask you, Ms. Harrison, are you able to provide on notice the department's performance metrics in relation to workers' compensation?
I'm certainly happy to look into what we can provide, Mr. Diadam. You would appreciate that large organisations do look at their workers' compensation premiums. They look at them because it gives you an indication of the health of your workforce. I can also assure Mr. Diadam that any of the targets that may or may not exist in relation to specific premium reductions would not include any COVID impact, because we would, if we were, we would want to pull that out and look at it separately as its own category. And so there is no sense in the organisation that people would be incentivised to not have those claims reported. I am confident we have provided the advice to our staff. I hear your concerns that not as many staff as you would expect have accessed that workers' health.
Stunningly low levels, really.
I know that they are your words.
That wasn't a question. That was a interjection, and you interrupted Ms. Harrison, and I'd ask you not to interrupt her.
And I'm very happy for the department to undertake a broader communication in relation to those matters in terms of our staff. I would indicate that it is only almost at the time that you need the workers' comp that people might consider putting the application form in, and so it is an individual's choice, but I'm very happy to make sure and to assure the committee and to reinforce our existing communications to our staff that workers' compensation is available to them if they have contracted COVID.
I wanted to perhaps put to you, I mean, obviously, COVID aside, if staff aren't making workers' compensation claims in relation to, and this seems to be, a preference for taking sick leave, whether that's as a result of encouragement from the employer or an employee choice, that's perhaps unclear. But if there's this inclination not to file workers' compensation claims for low-level injuries in the workplace, isn't that a concern for you, particularly around the issue of occupational stress? Because I think, wouldn't be uncommon for, where teachers are feeling under the pump. I mean, the system is under a lot of pressure at the moment, lots of teacher absences, teacher shortage. It's compounding the pressure that's on teachers. That may manifest itself in occupational stress. That's a workplace injury. That should be captured in your workers' comp statistics, but that's being masked if people are being encouraged to access sick leave. Are you concerned about that, Ms. Harrison?
So, Mr. Diadam, I don't want to conflate two issues here. I think we've talked about sick leave in relation to COVID short-term illness versus a need for long-term support through a workers' compensation claim for COVID. In relation to occupational stress and in the broad categories of workers' compensation, they tend to be referred to as psychological injuries in the workplace. That is certainly something that I think all parts of the public sector with a frontline workforce would be concerned about. And the reason we track the premiums for work health and safety is so that we can make sure we're putting the appropriate supports and interventions in place when we see specific concerns raised through that data. And so we have had and continue to have support for wellbeing for our staff. We do when we have specific events that we think could really add to the stress of our staff, such as the flooding up in the Northern Rivers at the moment, deploy additional support into those areas to provide support for staff. And Ms Nixon can give you examples of exactly what we've done in Lismore to that end. We did the same during the bushfire situation a few years ago now. And we maintain that connection and support. And we also make sure that our providers of our employee assistance programme are available for staff in those circumstances as well.
I've got a limited amount of time. I just wanted to come back to the question about incident reporting data collection that Mr Disdar touched on. So is that something that is routinely recorded in Central or similar?
Are you talking about the behaviour incidents?
Behavioural incidents, yes, sorry.
So different schools, as I think Mr Disdar indicated, would use their own systems. Some will be manual, some will be a system like Central.
So to say a school, a high school in Western Sydney, what system would they apply? Is Central the sort of go-to
The vast
technology?
majority of our high schools would use Central, yes.
Are you able to provide on notice how many high schools, or how many schools, high school, primary, are using Central for the purposes of incident reporting?
So I don't know that we would reference it as incident. So we have a particular definition around incident reporting to our work health and safety hotline, but certainly if I'm happy to come back to you on notice for the number of schools that are using Central to record their local behaviour data, as well as the information they report to us.
I mean, in particular, I'm looking at this article that was in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday, where there was a sort of diary entry, and it seemed to be
Must have killed you to read.
the reporting requirements on behaviour is actually one of the kind of administrative burdens that seems to be stressing teachers out. Do you think that's fair to say, Mr Disdar, that that's a
What I would say,
point for teachers?
well, what I would say, Mr Diadam, is that meeting the wellbeing and academic needs of our students are the primacy of every teacher's work. Teachers I talk to in my visits to schools take that dual responsibility of wellbeing and academic need seriously, and
But you can be concerned about wellbeing of students and still feels that the process is causing occupational stress, can't you?
And you know, even when I was back in the classroom in 1997 at Ashcroft High School, that was a requirement of me to make sure that I was reporting both positive student endeavour. I'd give that access alongside behaviour concern. We took that seriously as a staff, and I see schools take that seriously because of what I said earlier. You may have an instance of a child with a lot of low-level signals in their maths class, science class, geography class that together indicate that the welfare team, wellbeing team should intervene, should interview that
I don't think
child.
there's any argument, Mr Disdar, about whether it's important. The question is it also contributing to occupational stress for teachers?
And because that's important to a teacher, because that's important to a profession, I would argue that that's core business that's valued. What I would say, Mr Diadam, is that schools, and we need to support schools to make that as easily as possible a system. So when you say, do they use Central for that? Well, a lot of our schools use Central for their admin platforms, and you know, it could be argued that they see that investment as a way of making this process easier on staff. So I do accept the premise that we can always make those things as seamless and easy for staff, but I would reject the premise that it's you know, that it's not critical and important that staff report on that.
I never suggested it wasn't important. My point was about whether it's a stress point for teachers, and you haven't addressed that.
Oh, well, I'm saying the systems need to be as easy and as timely as possible for teachers because their role's fulsome, but they would not neglect the role of wellbeing and academic need.
They need extra time for those kind of activities, Mr.
Well,
Disdar?
this falls into the area of wellbeing need, and if you can have those systems as seamless as possible, then they're not as time consuming for staff.
Thank you. Mr. Disdale, coming back to Walgett College, what sort of benchmarks are set for the literacy and numeracy levels and other qualifications for the student learning support officers and the Aboriginal education officers?
So, Chair, the school has a strategic school improvement plan where we set our reading and numeracy targets, the top two bands, like we have for every other school, the Premier's priorities. I think you're referring, Chair, if I've got it right, to the non-teaching workforce.
Yeah, when you recruit these student learning support officers and the AEOs, do they have to have a certain level of qualification? Because there's a suggestion by some Walgett teachers that they have very low levels of literacy and numeracy and also poor attendance rates, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, so, Chair, thanks for clarifying. They are non-teaching roles in our schools. Like all of those non-teaching roles, they would be subject to merit selection processes, interview processes, as well as meeting the working with children check requirements. Because as you'd appreciate, Chair, they're not on their own in the classroom. They're there with a qualified teacher. So
Sure.
we would test their capacities and capabilities through both a written application and the merit selection process.
And do they need a benchmark level of literacy and numeracy and some kind of academic qualifications to be in the classroom?
You don't need, I think I'm correct in saying, academic qualifications to be a school learning support officer, and we don't...
Do you need to have finished high school yourself to be one?
I don't believe we stipulate what
No?
the entry requirements are.
So
Ms Casher may want to add to
people who
that.
didn't get to year 12 can be in the classroom trying to help.
Well,
Wouldn't it be helpful to have people who are qualified?
Yeah, what I would reiterate, Chair, is we would want skilled and capable and qualified people. I know you're going to minimum levels of literacy and numeracy, and I'm saying we would test that through the application and merit selection process. But as you'd appreciate, Chair, we've also got school leavers who won't have completed the HSC and gone back through pathways into TAFE and back through uni. So we wouldn't want to discount, those that have taken alternate pathways from also entering that role and demonstrating their capability and capacity.
Right. Has the department advised principals, not just at Walgett, but under other connected community schools, to try and help these Aboriginal employees complete their professional learning activities when actually they should be unaided in going through that?
What I can say, Chair, I'm aware of a number of our school learning support officers that we have sponsored and seen their potential to be effective future teachers, and we've sponsored their pathways through teaching. I'm reiterating, as you appreciate, they're not employed to be teachers. They're employed to be school learning support officers, supporting the teacher in their practice in that classroom in supporting those learners. So we have sponsored a number who have shown their capacity and ability to be future teachers in the system, and if any of them required upskilling in any area, then we'd do that through their professional learning plan.
Right. The NAPLAN results at Walgett are obviously very disappointing. There's another suggestion, very worrying, that the aides, these teacher aides that you're talking about, are helping the students to try and complete the NAPLAN results. That is, they're cheating, just to try and improve the results. Still at a dismal level, but there shouldn't be cheating, should there?
Well, I reject that premise outright, Chair. If you have any evidence that would point to any of our workforce doing the wrong thing, is what you have articulated, then we would value that information, because
well, these teachers have come through me, because you've got to acknowledge at Walgett that the environment's not one where these teachers can stand up and blow the whistle without repercussions. That's the problem, isn't it?
What I would reiterate, Chair, we have no material or evidence or correspondence to indicate to the such that you have. If you have any material of that kind, I would indicate that please provide that to the Secretary. That is practice that would not be tolerated in any public school.
Okay, well, I might suggest that you look at putting in independent observers during the NAPLAN week to see that the process there is genuine. Can I just come to the question of absenteeism? Because with any school, often we look at absenteeism, that's a function of something the school's doing or not doing. But isn't the truth in Walgett and these other connected community schools that there's a broader problem in the society itself, that tragically the level of sexual abuse of children is so high, and it happens at night time from people they know, that the children spend a lot of time out on the streets themselves because it's not safe to go home, and then they sleep by day. And in connecting with the community, like this model of connecting with the community, what's being done to overcome that tragic circumstance?
Chair, it's a very fair question you ask. I have indicated in other estimates hearings how we selected these schools. These schools are not just based on the educational data, which indicates we've got a long way to go to get better outcomes for students, but on societal data in these areas. For Aboriginal people in particular, by way of health data, incarceration, employment data, life expectancy, on multiple measures. These are communities that are doing it tough, and it takes a whole of government response. We are a very important component, provisioning for the future through education. But just like in Walgett or any of these 33 that we have as connected communities, there's a whole of agency response that's required, and we use our school reference group to try and galvanise our operations across agency to get it better for the children that we serve.
Well, what's the practical outcome of that rhetoric? Whole of government approach sounds great.
Well,
but what is the connection being made in the community with these other agencies to say that the monsters sexually abusing children should be arrested, and if the children can't be kept safe at night and can't get a decent night's sleep, and of course they then don't go to school, the children should be put in places where they are safe?
For example, in Walgett, Chair, Regional New South Wales has been engaged at a senior level to have whole of government agencies at the table, including myself for education, but across my counterparts across agencies to best tackle the multiplicity of challenges that the community in Walgett are facing. So Regional New South Wales gets tasked with the whole of government response.
And what efforts are being made on the two fronts that I mentioned, arresting the monsters and ensuring that the children get a good night's sleep in a safe place and can come to school the next day?
At Walgett specifically?
Yes, at Walgett.
Chair. My police colleagues are at that whole of government agency. They are not only looking at that data from the meetings I've been in, but also incarceration rates, youth crime rates, to best tackle effective community engagement and pathways before these things happen. These are issues that are real, that are tragic, that impact profoundly and are being worked on at a whole of government level, not just left to an agency on its own.
But do you think in the tragic reality of this, it's the problem that all these agencies just find too hard to solve, and it's easier to live with the tragedy, turn a blind eye?
Well, Chair, it does disturb me to say to you that some of these outcomes are cut across considerable time periods. What I do know, having been in those meetings, is that none of my colleagues, including myself, want to give up on these communities. We want to get, in my case, the best education provision, in my colleagues' case, the best provision of service we can. There is a real concerted effort that I see through Regional New South Wales and my colleagues to continue to work away at to make a difference, and I think that's incumbent on us in our public service role, and we do. Whilst the negative press certainly doesn't pick up on some of the small improvements I've spoken to at the high school across the 11 months, we, whilst not shying away from the challenge, also want to call out for our colleagues some of the good work that's occurring, to give them energy and zest for further improvement that's required there. I see a whole of government commitment to what we're talking about as one of New South Wales' most challenging, complex communities that deserve government not walking away from.
Thank you, Mr Disdar. To the Secretary, is there an update on the better breeding inquiry? The principal seemingly at Candos High School who made these remarks, and what's happened to her?
Chair, I note that this comment came out of one piece of paper in a bundle of many as part of a Standing Order 52. Our investigations continue in the department, and as soon as those investigations are finalised, I will happily provide an update to the committee.
It's been 6 or 7 weeks. How long does it take to investigate 2 words?
Chair, you'll appreciate that although it's only 2 words, certainly, as you have indicated, they have significant consequence. There are a number of people involved in the investigation. Obviously, there needs to be an evidentiary threshold that can be met, and so those investigations continue. And as soon as I have an update, Chair, I will absolutely come back to you.
When do you expect the investigation to conclude?
I will ask Ms Catcher if she has any details on the expected timeline for the investigation, but as I've indicated, as soon as it is complete, I'll very happily provide the committee with an update.
Thanks, Secretary. I would need to check in with the team, Chair, to find out exactly where it's at, and I'm not sure when the report will be delivered. I will say, though, as I did on the last occasion, that part of the process involves procedural fairness. So as the Secretary indicated, it's really important that we follow the process. And as the Secretary said, as soon as we're actually able to give further information about that, we absolutely will do so.
Okay. Did the department consider providing a clarifying or correcting statement to the Lithgow Mercury, which on the 1st of March had a headline, "The Education Department hits back at Lithgow High better breeding comments, saying the claims are incorrect and that the Daily Telegraph report has been rubbished by the Department of Education." Isn't the truth the Department of Education, in its incompetence, put 2 Candos High documents in the SO 52 that was called for Lithgow High? And any normal person would assume, having seen those documents in the piles, that they were from Lithgow High, that the department is responsible for the error. And what's more, the department's initial reaction was to issue a statement blaming the relieving principal at Lithgow High, and then the department subsequently had to apologise to her, Karen Marhood. So how was it the department gave this comment to the Lithgow Mercury without owning up to its own culpability?
Chair, you will appreciate, I'm sure, that we would provide advice to media outlets multiple times a day, and that not all the content of those of that information is necessarily published. Without the detail of what we provided to the Lithgow Mercury in front of me, I cannot comment on what was said versus what was then published. What I do know is we would absolutely, given the impacts on that community, want to make sure that as I accept the incorrect direction of those challenges to that, of the situation to that school was remedied, and that the school did not suffer any ongoing impacts as a result.
Right, can I just turn to a video that's circulating among teachers of the way in which last week Darryl Curry, the head of PES, sacked a New South Wales teacher of 20 years service with serious autoimmune conditions. This video runs for about 45 minutes and I've watched it. What is the point of these interviews that raise hopes for teachers that there might be some consideration of their circumstances when in the video Mr Curry tells this particular teacher he hasn't considered and he's not responsible for medical or health factors, privacy laws, legal or industrial relations advice, or even that he's responsible for the vaccine mandates in sacking her? Isn't this just a cruel, cruel process where people get their hopes up, they're getting a considered interview from Curry when it's really just a matter that they're automatically sacked?
Chair, so I have not seen the video. very happy to receive it if you wish to share it. I have not received it or viewed it. What I can say is that the requirements under the public health order are very clear for our staff, and that the medical contraindications that we were able to take into account underneath that public health order are set out by a TARGI, and therefore our room for movement in relation to that is somewhat limited by those factors.
The new South Australian government has abandoned the mandates for teachers, obviously in response to teacher shortages in that state. Why is the science different in New South Wales? Why are we keeping these mandates when South Australia is leading the way to let the teachers teach and to end the staff shortages?
And so, Chair, I would note that in order to attend school without a vaccination, those teachers are being asked to do a rapid antigen test every day and are required to wear a mask in school sites, and are limited in the classes they can teach. So I would just partly provide that context. The public health order is a health piece of legislation we are required to implement in our workforce. As long as that legislation is in existence, I am required to implement it. And we continue to get the advice from health, and we will continue to support that advice, that vaccination remains a key part of the defence for keeping workplaces safe in relation to COVID-19.
Have you given any advice to your minister that along the lines that obviously at some stage COVID will pass, and that we need to plan for the end of the mandates?
And certainly you will have seen discussion, I think, quite publicly by government about the fact that we need to move our response to COVID into an endemic state, not a pandemic state, and we are part of those conversations within government.
Right. Is there any forecast for when endemically we won't need these mandates in New South Wales?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair, no.
No. And are you still planning to go ahead with the triple vaccination employment mandate?
And so we are still encouraging our staff to absolutely get vaccinated. The third vaccination requirement has not been put into place within the public health order, and we are currently looking at where and how we implement that through our own mechanisms, and whether it would be appropriate to do so.
Right, so you're backing away from your earlier statement that you'll do the booster mandate.
And so I am looking at the mechanisms in the way that we will implement that requirement.
Right, have you got an estimate on how many teachers you'll lose if the booster was mandated, given the general lower than expected rates across the community?
And so what I can say in relation to that, Chair, is the lower than expected rates of boosters through the community is also linked to the higher prevalence of COVID through the community over the recent weeks, because once you've had COVID, there is a period of time after which you are not required to get boosted, and questions around booster uptake and their impact is probably best directed for health. At the moment, we don't have an indication of the number of our staff that have had the booster.
Right, so you really couldn't implement the mandate anytime soon because you're totally in the dark as to what that would mean in terms of losing teachers.
We are currently updating our Vaxatest system to include the booster vaccination. And once that is available, we will start to collect that data from our staff.
Right. Can I just point out that I think you might find that everyone got vaccinated and then the numbers went to 30 or 40,000. And people have thought, well, what's the point of doing the booster? So I think that's the bigger factor than lots of people who've got COVID. People are looking at the evidence and responding, and I assume your teachers would be, in some part, responding in a similar way. Can I just come to comments? I think, Mr Disdale, you made these comments on an online forum. Was it Telegram last week when you said the department sees no need to, and I quote, collect information around the methods used by schools to address staff absences, end of quote, even though the teachers online pointed out how easy it would be to collect the data on the use of casuals and the number of merged and unsupervised classes in each school. You weren't persuaded by the response the teachers gave. They welcome very much the fact that you were on their forum, providing information from a departmental perspective. But how hard is it to collect this data about casuals and merged classes?
So, Chair, I think you're referring to Yammer, where
Yammer?
Yeah, where I posted...
Not up on all this, I'm very old, a bit of a dinosaur. What's Yammer?
There's all different social media platforms, Chair. It's our internal department communication.
I was on Yammer,
platform.
it's not Telegram, it's Yammer, okay.
Yeah.
Right, it was on Yammer.
Yeah, I was a bit
Internal, right, okay,
confused when
I've got an
you said
internal
the,
document.
Telegraph, because I
I've
don't
got so many
remember-
documents, I don't know where they come from.
I don't remember talking to the Telegraph last week.
No, Telegram. You know, there's
Telegram.
an
Sorry.
online thing
Sorry,
called
Chair.
Telegram, but this is Yammer.
Yeah,
Okay,
what he's
on Yammer.
referring
Okay,
to.
well, you're on Yammer.
So it's
What
an
about the teachers who said to you on Yammer that you can collect this data about casuals and merged and unsupervised classes? It's quite easy to do that on a daily basis.
Yeah, Chair, so I did post on Yammer. This was in relation to questions around minimal supervision, and we don't keep that data centrally. We have been collecting attendance data daily through an app, and those teachers were pointing that, why don't you do that through that process? And my answer was indicating that we don't want to add to further data collection burden in schools. We leave that up to the school to determine how to operationalise. We don't see a need to collect that data centrally.
Thank you. The opposition.
Thanks. I want to come back to reporting on student behaviour. This is obviously something that is disproportionately distributed amongst your teaching workforce because, if you've got an OC class, you're teaching a selective school, chances are behaviour is not that much of an issue. Whereas, in some other schools, much more difficult schools, you've got a lot of behaviour issues, and that obviously generates a workload for those teachers. That's a fair assessment, isn't it, Mr. Gisto?
No, I don't believe so, Mr. Diadam. I was a student of a selective high school myself. I can't tell you that the classes I was in as a student, including myself, were impeccably behaved throughout the 7 years, and
I'm not
there was
saying that, Mr.
no need for intervention.
No, you're actually being a bit ingenuous
We
there
had
because
bright, witty
obviously
comments on our side.
to suggest that behaviour is comparable
Probably
in
backfire.
selective schools to some comprehensive high schools is just not correct. It's plainly wrong.
Well,
Plainly wrong.
There can be needs to make behaviour referrals in all contexts, and there can be need to make wellbeing referrals for students in all
My question is about the volume of behaviour referrals. And it is inequitably distributed throughout the system. There are some schools where there are a lot of behaviour referrals. There are other schools where there are relatively few.
I'd accept that premise.
Okay. So, in those situations where there's, like a situation where a lot of behavioural referrals coming out of a class, how does that then trigger support for that teacher?
Very good question. So we use our needs-based funding, as you appreciate, to make sure that student need is met. Our resource allocation model across our equity loadings allocates additionality of funding based on student need, and students that have these needs and require adjustments, both behaviour, learning, multiplicity of areas, that school would then be receiving the funding to put support programs in place alongside whatever system support may be needed.
There's no guarantee that individual students who have behavioural issues attract actual additional support, though, is there?
But, I was just going to your premise that some contexts are more challenging than others.
Yeah.
I'm just also using that to say, Mr. Diadam, that those more challenging contexts, in general, tend to attract greater additionality of funding, and our leaders of those contexts, our staff in those contexts, pride themselves on knowing their students and putting into place programs and initiatives that meet those needs, and they would use that additionality of funding for that.
But what about the kid who's actually got the disability or the behavioural condition? There's no actual nexus, is there?
Well, there's also state office support that comes into play. So, if we're talking about a particular kid and the school has looked at all its mechanisms and needs behaviour specialist experts to work with the school, then that's a state office resource that comes into play to help that teacher, help the teachers in that school, help the student and help the family.
What about, so if a kid's got ADHD, do they attract additional funding?
Our low-level adjustment for disability is the equity line that takes into account funding for students. Then there's, on top of that, needs-based funding depending on the student's need, where there might be additional diagnosis that requires additional support.
I see. So if there's an if there's a diagnosis, they attract additional tied support for that
So,
student?
Mr. Adam, I think we canvassed some of these issues a few hearings back. There is, in relation to our integrated funding support, which is the individualised stuff, that is a diagnosis basis, and we are currently working through how we adjust that to take into account some of those other behavioural-related items that aren't recognised as a disability as such. So that integrated funding support historically was a diagnosis of a particular disability. Our low-level funding for disability is driven by the collection of data through the NCCD, which is the National Data Collection, and that is judgment-based by a teacher. And so through that equity, through that loading that comes then through the Gonski funding, that's what we then apply out to the schools.
That's like a package of money that goes to the school. But what I'm trying to get to is, how does the individual student attract the support that they need
And so
from the funding? Presumably the funding's calculated on a per capita basis. You've got so many kids you qualify under the low-level adjustment for disability.
Yes.
And this is
So-
where we would expect our schools and for those students that have been identified within a school from the local data they collect, most schools would have a well-being kind of executive meeting that would meet regularly and talk about talk about individual cases and the case management support that's needed for individual students. They would seek to implement supports across the school that enable them to support those students, and where they need additional help, they would reach out to the corporate teams, corporate non-school-based service teams to provide assistance.
Do they qualify for like SLSO support?
They can do within the school, so the school may well in those situations fund additional SLSOs to support particular students in class.
So where a child doesn't have a diagnosis, but clearly the school leadership suspect that the child may have a disorder, a condition that would attract additional funding, what does the school do then?
And so the school, Mr. Disdar will have specific examples, but the schools will in general start by working with the family around the needs of that student.
Is there financial support to assist the family to obtain a diagnosis?
There can be. The school can use student assistance funding if the family require specialist medical practitioners to work with the child and for the reporting. We've been there's an access request process, Mr. Diadam, that you may have heard of or come across, and that's the process schools and the system use for additional funding on top of the low-level adjustment for disability for a student with higher needs. We have been working with our schools and our experts to streamline and improve that process to make it easier to access the funding. We have had feedback along the way that it can be complex with the reports and diagnosis that's required, and we've been working to improve that.
Can I ask about training for staff who have kids with disabilities in their classroom? How does that work? I mean, classes are put together at the beginning of each year. A teacher probably doesn't necessarily know who they're going to get until quite late in the year before, if not at the beginning of the school year. So they don't know what the sort of disability profile of their class is. How do you guarantee that the teacher who's got a kid, or maybe a number of kids who've got some disabilities in their classroom, have the training capability to be able to support those children? How do you guarantee that that teacher has the skills at the time when they get the class, when they need it?
It's a really good question, Mr. Diadam. Transition is a really important aspect of in-school and across school. So what I find schools tend to put a lot of attention and focus on this. So when they're going from, let's say, year 1 to year 2, it's within the same school, you'll have the two teachers meet, so there's a solid handover from one teacher to the next teacher around, and it could be multiple teachers.
That's not training, is it? There's a commitment to ensuring that staff who are dealing with kids with disabilities have the training.
No, I want to definitely get to that too. I was just trying to describe the handover process, and there might be multiple teachers involved in that meeting alongside the year advisor. Those higher needs students will be well known to staff because the Secretary was outlining the learning support processes. Every school must have...
I might ask you, if you could, to put the answer on notes. I know my colleague's got limited time and she needs to ask a couple
So,
of questions.
Chair, if I may, we're entitled to answer the questions we're asked.
Yes, please,
Sure.
proceed.
So, a learning support team is compulsory in every school context, so those higher needs students are known across the school rather than just in one particular classroom because they're part of the school community on how to best support them. Then if there's a staff member who's lacking confidence or expertise to handle that student's needs, we'd provide them with the requisite additional training.
So that would be identified, Mr. Diadam, at the local school level by the principal in supporting the staff for the year ahead.
And delivered locally.
And sometimes delivered locally, sometimes they will draw in experts from outside the system, and sometimes they will draw on experts from within the system.
Thanks very much. I've just got a couple of final things to cover. In the questions taken on notice, question 83 talked about hiring academics into, I think it's recruiting mid-year career transitions. The answer said that there are 10 offers that have been given. How many are actually teaching in schools now?
So the mid-career entry programme, and I'll ask Ms. Catcher to provide the details, but it does include an element of study as well as getting into the classroom. And so this is the very first time that we've run the programme, and it started just at the start of this year. We had the first 50 successful applicants start the process. So it is unlikely that they are currently active in classrooms because they would be in the training component of their mid-career transition programme.
Thanks, Secretary. Thanks for the question, Ms. Hussos. Can I quickly just go to an earlier question that you had this morning, and I can answer quickly. You asked a question about international recruitment, and I've just been able to confirm a couple of things for you. So we will support visas and relocation in line with other agencies in New South Wales, and we will require that those individuals who are successful in being placed stay in the role for 3 years. I just wanted to let you know that as a supplement. And so as the Secretary said, the program as at the 31st of March 2022, and again, all of these numbers continually change, and we'll update the committee as we can. The program's received 43 acceptances from participants into the program, with 7 more offers pending. I don't believe they've actually physically started yet, but I will come back to you and on notice and let you know when that anticipated start date is.
That would be great. Thanks, Ms. Catcher. Can I just ask Ms. Harrison, question 108, the answer said that it seems, upon reading that there's been a net 176 community preschools closed between 2020 and 2021. Is that accurate?
Sorry, Ms. Hussos, if you could just give me the question as well as the answer.
108?
If you could just give me a moment to find the question.
I'll just turn to my...
But if those are the figures we gave you, I would be confident they are accurate.
Okay. So do you have do you monitor for waiting lists for community preschools?
Not centrally that I'm aware of would we monitor community preschool waiting lists.
Okay.
We might, in a particular location, if we see the need for some specific need, we may well go out and survey and ask questions, but I'd need to come back to you on notice with any specifics that we've done on that.
That would be great. And can you provide me, you'll probably need to take this on notice, for a list of the schools that the best in-class teachers have visited since in 2021 and 2022?
The ones that they've visited or the ones that they've worked with, Ms. Hussos, because some of their work obviously through that period has been virtual rather than in person, given the nature of the experience. If I could give you both, that would probably give you a
I
clearer
understand.
picture.
Yeah, that's completely fine. And just to check, they have a reduced teaching load so that they can participate in that, is that correct?
They do. So the majority, when they were first recruited, and I'll need to go back and check how many of them still maintain this particular proportion. The specific starting point was that they taught for 50% of the time and supported the development of other teachers 50% of the time. I know for some where they wish to do more of one part of that role than the other. They might want to do more of the professional development for a particular time, and so may have reduced their teaching loads over specific times in consultation with their school. But in addition to that, we provided the school with an additional full-time equivalent to backfill their position. So in fact, the schools they came from also got a benefit from the fact that we were taking away one of their best teachers for some of their time to support the system.
Okay. And if you can just provide on notice for the list of those 176 community preschools that have closed in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Latham.
Yeah, I've just got 3 final matters, if I can. Secretary, are you aware that the New South Wales Police did not launch any investigations and thereby found no evidence of any wrongdoing in response to the Teach Us Consent website run by Chanel Contos? And the answer I've got from the Police Minister shows, for the obvious reason, because all the allegations were anonymous, it was impossible to investigate them.
Yes, I'm aware of that in general terms, but not specific terms, Chair.
Right, and the department, in answering question 124, has basically said it too wasn't able to investigate any of these matters inside schools for which you're responsible. Do you think it sets a worrying precedent that the curriculum has been changed in response to a website from which government authorities established zero confirmed evidence?
I think that, firstly, the changes to the New South Wales curriculum occurred before the website was put into place. So you'll recall from our answers that we had initially reviewed the curriculum, and this is really a matter for Mr. Martin and Nessa. So I'm going from recollection here, Chair, but our initial curriculum changes were made prior to Ms. Contos's website, and that we have since put other things under review, and then there's been national curriculum changes since then, is my recollection. But I can come back to you through supplementaries if you would like to ask them, and I will make sure they're directed to Mr. Martin appropriately.
So if you can just come back with any changes that have been made in response to the Contos website, given the fact that the department and the police have not even investigated any of these matters. And
so what I can confirm, Chair, is that the strengthened consent content in the K-10 PDHPE syllabus by Nessa followed extensive consultation with stakeholders, community, students and teachers, and it was implemented in all schools from 2020, so predating.
From 2020. So the Contos website hasn't changed anything? Is that what you're saying?
No, it led us to develop a cross-sectorial statement of intent to strengthen the shared understanding and harm prevention for these issues in school communities, and we continue to work with the other sectors on our implementation of that statement of intent, but it is not necessarily further curriculum changes.
Well, in the statement of intent, do you intend to investigate any of the matters that were raised on the website? Because it's been the catalyst, I know, for the Minister having a roundtable and obviously a fair bit of publicity.
And so certainly I think we can probably all agree that the website, the content on the website provides information and insight that is challenging to read at times. I think as our answer has indicated, we cannot investigate claims that are anonymous and where someone doesn't come forward, but nor do I think we can ignore the volume of voice that has been given by that website in relation to how some people might feel in relation to some of the cultures and practices that they've experienced at school.
Right. Do you think anonymous websites are a way to effect change in the curriculum?
As I indicated, our changes to the curriculum were made in 2020, were implemented from 2020.
Okay. Are we getting any closer to an accredited list of wellbeing providers in schools, that schools can rely on, an evidence of achievement and success in what they're trying to do rather than good intentions?
Yes, so we have the first set of approved providers, and I'll ask Ms. Walker to provide the specific cohort that captures, and we are now starting to work through additional providers in additional areas.
Thanks, Secretary. Yes, so it's two-stage of that accreditation process. And as you mentioned, we looked at things that were in schools. This second stage is looking at well-used, although not centralised programs, but I can get you the dates of when that'll be finished because that review is nearly complete.
And what's the evidence base by which you assess the effectiveness of a provider? Because a lot of them have got, say, a celebrity fronting it or publicity or a good spiel. It doesn't mean that they've got any proven record of success, does it?
My understanding is it's a Monash University literature review and evidence-based assurance process.
Right, and are you referring to the one that the department commissioned from the Fiona Stanley Institute in WA that showed that a lot of this wellbeing stuff is a bit nebulous and it's hard to pin down any positive impacts?
I have heard of the one that you refer to from Western Australia. I'd have to check and see whether that's a considered part.
Commissioned at substantial cost. I think it's only a couple of years old. It was another literature search that was ambiguous as to what sort of impacts these programs can have.
And so, Chair, I think what we do know from the data we have from the Tell Them From Me survey, which is global and has a longitudinal study behind it, is that strong wellbeing outcomes for students are linked to strong academic outcomes, and therefore we will continue to look for effective programs in that area that do make a difference to student wellbeing. That will, of course, require us to have some testing of different programs at certain times, but we should do that under the appropriate conditions.
Right, and when do you expect the full list of accredited providers to be finalised?
I think Ms Walker said she could come back to you on the timeline for phase 2. So phase 1 is already in place, and the phase 2 of those regularly used providers is coming in coming months. But I'll ask Ms Walker to come back to us on your notice on that.
Thank you. And finally, if I can just take you to the answer to supplementary question 126, another one that I often raise at these estimates. I asked what independent evaluation of its open plan classroom program has the department undertaken, assessing impact on student learning outcomes. What did this show? And the answer was that a growing body of research explains how investing in infrastructure improvements can improve outcomes. The right conditions in learning spaces, such as light levels, temperature, humidity and ambient noise, all contribute to supporting students' learning. The government's investment in the cooler classrooms and LED lighting upgrade programs are improving conditions in learning spaces to support students' learning. What's that got to do with open plan classroom design? I mean, the department's spending billions on a certain type of construction and open plan classrooms. Has there been an independent evaluation of the impact on student learning, given the common sense and some of the academic material to say that in open plan classrooms students can be distracted by the other class up the way, and also the noise level, that students, particularly at the back of the class or with hearing issues, can't hear what their teacher is saying?
So firstly, Chair, just to clarify a couple of the points that you've raised, we are investing significant dollars into upgrading and building new schools. We are focused on delivering flexible learning spaces that can be deployed to support a number of different teaching styles and approaches. And certainly the vast majority of our new builds would have that kind of flexible space that would include breakout areas, but also more traditional classrooms able to be configured out of partition walls and the like. So we are supporting both. I do not believe we have an external evaluation of the nature that you have requested, but I'm very happy to go and look into how we could conduct such an evaluation, given that that's not the only method of teaching used in those spaces. They are by and large flexible, rather than just an open plan classroom. They tend to be a flexible learning space where you can partition off for particular teaching modes.
But isn't it true that CC emphasises explicit instruction?
We certainly, as a department, would also support.
Which is
Yes.
support. But and that is not done all that effectively in a classroom environment where there's 3 or 4 classes in the one space.
In some of my school visits, I've seen teachers engage in explicit instruction in large spaces very effectively. I think it very much just depends on the pedagogy being used at the time with the teacher in the room and the number of teachers in the room at a time. So if you've got a number of classes together, you might have all of those teaching staff with you and able to deliver a very clear and explicit lesson in that space. I've certainly seen that on my visits to schools. But I take your point, Chair, and I'm very happy to come back to you, back to the committee with what we think might be possible in terms of continuing to build our research base and understanding here.
So going beyond the anecdotal, then there is an intention to do an independent evaluation.
I'm very happy to go and look at what's possible, Chair.
Spending program, and if the answer was that there's no current independent evaluation, why isn't that reflected in why don't you just say no in answer to question 126 instead of going on about cooler classrooms and LED?
I think what we refer to in our answer, Chair, that we have based our approach to design and investment in new and upgraded infrastructure in a body of research. That is the evidence that we have relied upon in developing that insight. Very happy to go away, as I've indicated.
Thank you for your answers. So we've got a few minutes left. Did the government have any questions?
Not from
that
us.
came to
I think I've been very satisfied with the responses given so far.
The opposition want to take up 3 minutes?
I've got one question.
No, I did have a question.
Rethink.
Yeah, no.
Mr. Chance.
Did I
Mr. Diadam.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about this document, which I had caused to look at, the Every Student, Every School, that came out in 2012, I think. It had some graphs in it that predicted surging enrolments for students with both autism and mental health. That was the sort of prediction up to. And I wanted to ask whether, on notice if you like, if you could provide data as to whether that expectation actually came to fruition and whether the trend line is continuing to increase as predicted by this document.
I don't have reference to the document that you're quoting, and I haven't seen it, Mr. Diado, but I am very happy to come back to you on notice.
I know it's the document, don't you?
I recall the document, but it's been some time, so.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Very happy to come back on notice with
decade, in
what we're
fact.
seeing in the system at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
Noting that's probably only the reported cases that we would be able to.
I had one other question, which was about the Grow Your Own Teacher program. So this is part of the teacher supply strategy. I wanted to know how many participants are now in the Grow Your Own Teacher program.
And so just while Ms Katcher finds the information in relation to that, we are committed as an organisation and a lead institution in relation to education to continue to promote teaching as an exceptional career for young people throughout the state and beyond. I would suggest to the committee that the current debate that we might be seeing around some of those issues in the media and beyond may not be assisting us in those endeavours.
Or indeed some political opportunism.
So it would be, I would call on all of those involved in and around education to continue to support people who wish to undergo teaching as a degree and to promote it wherever we get the chance. But Ms Katcher will have some further information on the Grow Your Own programme.
Thanks, Secretary. And you're right, Mr. Diadam, it's an important part of the strategy, and particularly for our regional and remote schools. So we're targeting 70 in the first instance. We're in the process at the moment of developing the program to identify high potential individuals who would be suitable for that program. They would be perhaps school leavers in a regional area who may be encouraged to consider a career in
focus for the targeting?
In regional and remote areas. I can take on notice any specific areas, but because we're in the design phase, I think we are in the process of looking at the areas that it would be.
The program
most likely.
You haven't actually recruited anyone through this program yet?
It's not. It's designed to encourage people who are interested in a career in teaching to, as we said, grow your own. So basically we're encouraging them at that early age to engage with the process of joining the profession. And so those people wouldn't be ready to start teaching. We would need to work with them through their training, etc.
And so, Mr. Diadam, we did publish a teaching supply strategy that is a commitment over a number of years. We have already made significant progress in relation to the fast stream programme, the mid-career entry, and are well underway with the international recruitment. As Ms Katcher has indicated, the Grow Your Own programme is currently in the design phase, and as soon as it is designed and under implementation, as she indicated, there will be a lag in terms of the number of people coming into the profession because they will undoubtedly be in school themselves and needing to make that transition.
Isn't it fair to say, Ms Harrison, though, that the crisis in terms of teacher supply is more acute in rural and regional areas? Why is that
Question on this.
priority?
So I'm very happy to take that on notice given time.
Our
Mr.
time
Diadam.
has expired at that point.
Sorry.
It being
Can I just
1:30.
clarify one issue I think Ms Houzos raised, just so I'm clear?
Order.
I've got
Order.
confidence in the department.
There's a clarification
Just want to
about a
clarify
matter
so that we
from
come back
Of course.
to you with the right. You referenced a question, previous question 108 in relation to early childhood services,
Yep.
and quoted a number of services that had closed.
176 was my calculation, but if I'm wrong.
I've just been asked to clarify that the understanding that might have referenced the number of staff, a staffing issue rather than a service issue. I just wanted to clarify in relation to that question 108.
I understand. Yes, I've just referred because it was a supplementary question.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you to the government officers for your attendance here today. The committee secretariat will be in touch in the near future regarding any questions taken on notice, any supplementary questions and other necessary matters. Thank you. And we've got a brief deliberative, and at 2:30 we'll see the secretary and Ms Dickel about the other matter to do with TAFE. Thank you.
Thank you.